Good evening, this is Mayor Stewart, and I would like to call this regular meeting of the City Council to order and state that all council members are present through teleconferencing. Welcome to the first meeting in 2022. Would Council Member Pease please lead the council in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Please join in the pledge as you are able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll get right into it. Would City Manager Derek Johnson please present the report?
Derek, you're muted.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, members of the council. You may have seen last week that the Parks and Rec Department is moving forward with a project over at the Bob Jones Trail. We've had some significant ongoing issues and concerns with some of the vegetation that's built up and a lot of the fencing that was installed when the Bob Jones Trail was originally built back in the 2000s, late 1990s, has slowly been removed over time. And so we had a CIP project. In order for us to get in there safely, we needed to close the trail because there's going to be heavy equipment and other machinery moving around Bob Jones Trail for quite some time. We anticipate the project lasting from about January 10th through March 4th. So we'll be replacing the fencing all the way out to LOVR, all the way along Bob Jones Trail. And this is really intended to address some of the significant concerns we have with the habitat degradation that's happening in that area. This is a significant riparian corridor, and we have concerns about individuals being down in the creek and camping specifically in the creek. We need to make some adjustments and to try to make it absolutely clear where individuals cannot go within that trail network. So the city's making a sizable investment, and you saw some of the announcements last week. You probably should share with the council that our CAT team and our homeless outreach, homeless response manager made opportunities available to try to connect people with services. In every instance, we try to do placement over at 40 Prado. In most cases, in some cases, we were able to defer and refer people over to 40 Prado, but in many cases, people refused services and packed up stuff or left many of their belongings behind. Other update is the railroad safety trail. As you all know, the bridge is installed. We had a little bit of a setback with the weather in late December, early February. Had a chance to go out there on Sunday. They're making some progress. And we're still on schedule for the ribbon cutting. I think it's on the council's calendar for February the 16th, if I recall correctly. And you all know that it includes some pretty significant pedestrian and other improvements. Right now, they're finishing up a lot of the lighting and signage and finishing up some of the expansion joints on the actual structure itself. And they'll be doing some of the AC work, which is asphalt just behind CHP to connect with California. You may have seen that some of the protective fencing was installed on top of the bridge on California Street. And so we're making some progress. We're also looking at also some improvements to make sure that the area is lit. And also that we provide some cameras out there for ongoing safety. And we're looking at our fencing plan as well, because one of our commitments in working with Union Pacific is to keep people off of the right of way, which is a significant concern that they have. And one of the commitments that we've made over the years as we've continued to partner with them on constructing these facilities along the UP right of way. We also took a little bit of a break on the downtown paving project, but I wanted to give the council the progress that we've made. The slurry seal is all done on Higuera. Well, excuse me, it was delayed on Higuera and Napomo due to the December rain, so we'll be finishing some of that up. The Napomo Street paving's complete. The Napomo speed bumps have been implemented. We have a speed table at one of the Higuera mid crossing is underway. You may have seen that. And then the floating bulb outs and bike medians on Higuera and Mars east of Santa Rosa Road are under construction. Some of them west of Santa Rosa Road have been installed, and that's not how it will finally look. There are planters that will be installed on top of those bike medians, and there'll be plants installed similar to the landscaping that we did as part of the hybrid pedestrian beacon over off of Foothill. Moving forward, we've had, and this will be coming to the council as part of the mid-year budget. We've gotten a lot of feedback about the Higuera corridor complete street project. So right now we're in some preliminary concept planning and traffic analysis, and we're looking at, and we'll be coming to council requesting some funding as part of the funding that was that we supplanted with the grant that we received from Caltrans to build the Cerro San Luis Greenway project to do some planning over there. And that'll provide for the full corridor from Marsh and south to LOVR and Madonna. So we'll be able to provide greater enhanced safety improvements. They'll include high visual crosswalks and green bike lanes. I think many of you who've traveled the mid Higuera and South Higuera, we've seen housing projects and more intense development in those corridors. We're certainly seeing more pedestrians and cyclists through that corridor. And so some of the improvements we'll be making include pedestrian lead crossing at each of the signalized intersections. We've done that in the last couple of years. So when you walk up to a signal and you press the button, the actual sign changes first so that the pedestrian has a chance to get out into the crosswalk before it signals to the automobile to proceed. And that just provides the visibility for the pedestrian that they've got the right of way. And then we're looking at protected bike improvements, bike lane improvements, and our construction plans are to implement in 2023. And we're also exploring, we're having some conversations internally right now, because I know Higuera is an area of concern, but we're also thinking about the Foothill corridor as well. And so all of these areas really, require some planning to think through driveways, left turn movements, signals, what's going to happen with the pedestrian crossings, how do we deal with some of the areas where schools are crossing. And so I know that people, including staff, is very eager to make these changes to improve the safety in those corridors. We want to make sure that we get it right, and we do that by leading with some planning projects. I know this is on the council's top of mind, but I've been doing, you may have seen a lot of social media out there for the annual advisory body recruitment. Thanks to Whitney and the clerk's office for getting information out there about applications, and they are due by Sunday. And so we'll be working with the council members and liaisons for appointments coming back. We've got a fair amount of changes that are happening in the composition of our committees, just like we're seeing in staff. There's a fair amount of change in people's lives and looking at their commitments, and hopefully we'll have a good pool of applicants that the council can look to fill many of these important roles. The new, I want to share with the council, the SLOMA mural has been announced. And so you saw last year the Pacific Caribbean mural on the side of the SLOMA Museum that's being replaced. And so they've selected an artist. I believe they're out of Mobile, Alabama, Mayor Stewart. I think I got that incorrect when we spoke just last, but her name is Erin Leanne Mitchell. She'll be an artist in residence from February 3rd to the 24th. And so there'll be a series of events, both to learn about the art, learn about the artist, learn about what she's planning to do as part of this rotating art and mural on the museum. You may have seen that the museum has made some concerted effort to spruce up their outside in addition to the mural itself. They've upgraded and changed the landscaping, some of the lighting. They just recently rebuilt the deck. I think that was finished last week along the creek walk. And so thanks to their partnership, we're seeing some real activity. And thanks to the council members and to the whole council for their support. We had a pretty lively performance last Friday night as part of their exhibit, and them using some of the art that's been installed, the Mobius, to do a dance performance. Now shifting to COVID-19 updates, we are all well aware about the Omicron and Delta variant spikes of COVID-19. Masking indoors is required both by state and local order. The county and public health officer is continuing to highly recommend vaccinations. All City Hall and all city operations continue to remain open, but I've emphasized to our teams that we've started to see infections within the ranks of our staff, and we've sent people home or had them quarantined, that I don't want to stress people physically and or mentally in an effort to try to keep our public counters or our in-person operations open. And so the commitment that the staff made is that, as soon as we hit a critical point, if we have to curtail operations, that will notify the council. Say, for example, if we had to shut down anything over at community development with any infections, we'll make sure the council knows. Thus far, we've had a pretty effective program with volunteer testing that has been some early surveillance that has given us indication if individuals are asymptomatic, and we've sent them home. We're also encouraging that if you're able to work from home is highly encouraged. As you see there, the rapid tests are provided for staff, so we're giving those to staff with certain proviso of how to use those. We were able to obtain 500 tests from the county of SLO. And just today, I signed an additional purchase order for an additional 1,600 tests that should get us through spring. There's also the new health officer order to isolate and or quarantine if you are found to have COVID-19. I'll jump into the numbers as part of the presentation here in just one moment. I continue to rely on the IHME forecast for daily infections and testings and impacts of where we are for hospital resource use. You can see that this round of infections looks much different than the past. It looks more, I wouldn't characterize it as a wave, it's almost a wall of COVID that's been moving our direction. And so it's showing as of today that we're at the peak for the state of California, though, at least from my experience, San Luis Obispo County tends to lag behind the rest of the state. And we tend to trail, sometimes weeks behind. And so I don't think anyone knows today exactly how Omicron will model out in San Luis Obispo County. I heard some news reports earlier today that New York City was already starting to see the downslope of Omicron, but perhaps that might be too early to see what's going to happen. And earlier today, the county did issue a series of communications about taking the necessary precautions. So we are starting to see the impacts to our local hospital resources. And you can see in that bottom graph that, we are on the upswing, and there is a projected impact to hospital resources. And if you're following the news, you're seeing that in Texas and throughout the Southeast and different parts of the United States, that hospital resources are being constrained and emergency resources are being put into place. In terms of COVID cases, this is for the county of San Luis Obispo. I won't go into great depth. You can see that we've had some of the highest daily case rates. I don't know what our current number of active infections are in our county right now, but it's very significant. You can see in the bottom table here that the number of cases of tests, confirmed cases, has been high. And, If we recall back to November, December, those numbers were about in the 40 or 50, and they climbed upwards of 400, 500 plus here recently. This is the total dashboard for the county. Total hospitalized to date, ICU to date, and deaths to date. And you can see that broken down by cohort in terms of how it lays out across different demographics in our county. In terms of vaccinations, you see up in the upper left-hand corner, the statewide vaccinations. And significantly what's I think interesting to me is the number of booster recipients, 51.2%. And these are numbers, these percentages reflect those that are eligible for the boosters. Number of vaccinations on hand. My understanding is that the state tries to keep around a 30-day supply of vaccines and doses. And in terms of how do we stack up in terms of dose administered by county of residence, we're at 440,000 doses. I think the last time we looked this, we were in the high 420s. So we continue to see some vaccination happening with our county, in our county. Where do we stand in terms of fully vaccinated and partially vaccinated? These numbers are not moving, I think, as quick as a lot of us would hope to see. The fully vaccinated stands at 65.6, partially 72.5. And then you can do the math to see the total unvaccinated population. In terms of variants, I think this is maybe out of date. It's showing, it's not showing, well, it's showing Omicron as a lower percentage. And I think as I saw some social media squares last night, that Omicron is now becoming the dominant strain in our county. So that brings us to a conversation that we had with the council just before the break. And thanks to the city clerk for helping prepare this slides in terms of what does the council want to do. I know that there's some interest in looking at different options for council meetings. And so option number one would be for the council and city staff to meet in person. That would be the council, city manager, and city attorney, and then staff and the public can come in via Zoom. We would recommend that the council meet in the council hearing room and that we use the existing fisheye camera and room audio, and then use individual laptop and headset with a boom mic. And so the soonest is that we could put that option into place would be February 1st, because we need some time to work through and make sure all of the technology works. Another option, but I don't think that this is recommended. I think Dr. Bornstein advised the board of supervisors, and they followed through with everyone back in person with no Zoom option, and that's not recommended, just based upon where we are with Omicron. And then long-term, and this is, I think, something for the council to think through, is that, you know, if hybrid meetings is something that the council wants us to be able to accommodate, we'll be coming forward to the council on February 15th with a set of budget recommendations, both on the equipment and capital side. We think it'll take about 2 to 3 months to obtain and then install the necessary equipment in council chambers to allow for hybrid meetings. But I just do want to remind the council that I think that if the council is interested in short and or long-term consideration of hybrid meetings, that we're probably going to need to dive into council policies and procedures manual, because our policies and procedures don't really foresee the use of hybrid meetings. And I think that there is some areas for policy discussion to make sure that we encounter the dynamics of having hybrid meetings with people zooming in from our city or throughout our state or internationally. How are we going to accommodate when we have those types of instances? So that concludes the staff report for tonight. And so we would invite the council to have a discussion if there's any direction to staff about how we want to proceed in terms of meeting options for February 1st and beyond.
Thank you so much. When you mentioned the number 2 option of everyone back in person with no Zoom option, that's the non-hybrid, everybody from the community in, correct?
Correct, which right now would mean everyone would need to be back in council chambers with masks.
Right. Okay.
And so,
Thank you. I see Councilmember Christensen has your hands up.
Yes, I do. I would love it as a birthday present to be back in, to go with option number one. I would like to get back into person for the council as a working group. I think we do much better work. We've got some pretty high intensity stuff coming in terms of budgets and going forward with our work programs this year. My belief is that this current surge will move through quickly. So we will hopefully be moving more towards a general in-person situation. But I think hanging on and waiting for all of the surges and all of the stuff to go through is not going to be practical. And I think we do, as you guys have heard me say, I think we do better work when we're able to see each other and talk to each other in person. Not that we've done a bad job, but I think we do better work, even better work when we're in person. And I know all of us have been vaccinated, and I know at least a number of us have, carefully attended, indoor events. So that's what I'm wanting. And then I would like to have a discussion, at the budget meetings about hybrid, although I'm not particularly, jumping for it. I just think we should have a discussion, but that's what I would like to do.
Thank you. I definitely agree. We do better in person. I think every person does on average, but I think right now, personally, I mean, as we saw, even the county, who was quicker to come back in person than we were, Board of Supervisors have already gone back into virtual as well. So I think with the current surge, that would be concerning to me. However, I hear what you're saying around a partial option one sometime soon. It would also be nice to me to see us doing this by the budget meeting personally, because I think budget is a very intense conversation time period where it would be better to be in person than not. That's just my personal opinion. Are there any other council members that would like to share? Councilmember Shoresman.
Yeah, excuse me. Excuse me. I'm agreeable to option one. I think it's sort of a happy medium in the short term. As Vice Mayor Christensen said, we're all vaccinated. I think the room is large enough that we can be safely distant from each other if needed. And I am curious about the long-term possibilities for a Zoom or a hybrid model. Just, I mean, this pandemic has shown us the potential emergency need for it, but also I think there are some benefits that can be obtained from community members who can't participate regularly in council meetings and want to be participating, and they can do it from home. And so there's childcare issues and all kinds of things that might be a solution for, although I do see that there might be some downsides to it as well. So I'm interested in discussing it.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Yes, I agree. I think option number one is the way to go for now. I do have to say, if there's another really strong surge, I might not be able to attend, or I could perhaps attend by phone, just because I'm in the demographic that's most vulnerable, as is my husband. And we both have underlying conditions. No, we're pretty healthy, but we do have underlying conditions. So two is a non-starter right now, and three, I'd like to know how much something like that would cost, but I'm somewhat hesitant to make a big investment. I mean, I know I'm jumping the gun on that, but number one seems to me to be the best short-term solution. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pease.
I agree to go forward with option one for now.
Thank you. And I too agree with Councilman Marks and Shoresman. Having a discussion around the hybrid is really important to me. I think increasing accessibility is always what we're looking for when it comes to decisions that we're making, and whether it's COVID or beyond, I think this would be a really good thing to do. So I look forward to having that investment conversation. City Manager, one thing I didn't see in your presentation was around COVID and Cal Poly. I know we've received some emails with concerns around Cal Poly coming in person. Have you been working with Cal Poly? What's that been like in the realm of COVID and City and Cal Poly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have received communications about decisions that the Public Health Department has made in consultation with Cal Poly. And those also are with Dr. Brescia as well, the superintendent, since that is their purview under statute. So we haven't had a role per se, and we don't have a role, nor do we have the technical expertise to advise Cal Poly. So it's been one that when decisions have been made or prior to them just being made and announced, we'll get an email. And we've been, we continue to work with Cal Poly. We've been doing some of the Sentinel testing of some of the wastewater to look at rates of wastewater, of some of the shedding of the RNA into the waste stream. But beyond that, we haven't had any direct conversations or a role in some of the strategy about testing or return or virtual or some of the accommodations that they've contracts that they've gone into to house some of the students that are being quarantined as a result of a positive test.
Great, thank you so much. And you answered my next question, which was going to be about the K through 12. I'm hearing of different community members, different communities outside of SLO County that went in person, and then K through 12 came back to virtual. So, but my understanding is we're not in that space right now. So thank you.
Yeah.
I heard you mention the Cerro San Luis Greenway. Just making sure that I've got that correct. That's replacing the previous name of Anholm Greenway, correct?
That's correct, and and staff has taken a little latitude here. We heard loud and clear from the community just the history of the Anholm track and the concerns about that name and the racist covenants that were placed in those properties. And so we are trying to juggle a lot of different balls, and so that seemed to be one that would be reflective of something people could easily recognize. But we plan on coming back to council with the construction documents. And at some point, if council wants staff to do some more outreach, engage the public about the name, we're happy to do that. So either this name's going to stick as a permanent name, or we can do some more work with the community and figure out a name that's better, more appropriate.
Great, thank you so much. Councilmember Shoresman.
Yeah, just one question about that, that your comments reminded me. So if I understood you correctly, the funding that is going to be used for some of the improvements on South Higuera and Marsh, or the southern end of Higuera to LOVR and Madonna, is from the previously designated funds that were replaced by the grant that we got to pursue the San Luis Greenway. Am I understanding that correctly? So we had that money budgeted to do the San Luis Greenway, and it was saved because we got the grant money. So now we have sort of this pot of money that was already designated for bike and pedestrian improvements, and we're going to shift it over to the South Higuera end of town.
Yeah, that's correct. So when the city was awarded the grant, just before the council, the budget was essentially baked at that point, and we got notice that we received the grant, and we heard from the community, hey, we want to make sure that these fundings, which were originally Measure G dollars, weren't just put back into the budget for any sort of use. And so we designated the funds in what we call the Infrastructure Investment Fund. So it was about $1.7 million. We'll be coming back to the council on February 15th. And we've got a set of recommendations, one for Higuera planning. We're working on potentially a scope of work for some planning along Foothill. We've got a whole range of pedestrian improvements we need to do for hybrid pedestrian crossings that we want to accomplish. And then you heard from the community earlier this year about doing some work to really light up the Choro underpass. And so that was inviting. And so we're looking at a grant application that we may or may not have to have some match funding. So we were going to use some of that funding for the match to build that. But the council will have the full opportunity to look at those recommendations as part of the mid-year budget, which will be presented on February 15th.
Thank you for that summary.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on city manager report? Well, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and move forward. City clerk, are Rebecca Bernstorff and Brendan Pringle available? Oh, there they are. Well, we're introducing Brendan Pringle today, and Rebecca Bernstorff, Community Services Business Manager, will do the introduction.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council. It's wonderful to see you all again, and Happy New Year. My name is Rebecca Bernstorff, and I'm the Business Services and Administrative Manager for the Community Services Group. I was before you just a month ago introducing 2 incredible additions to our CSG team, and I'm very excited to be here before you again to introduce to you the newest member to our Community Services Group, Brendan Pringle, the Administrative Analyst for Parks and Recreation. We are thrilled to welcome him to the city team. Brendan joined us about a month ago after previously serving Visits Locale, the countywide destination marketing and management organization, where he was for almost 7 years. Born and raised in SoCal County, he received his bachelor's degree from Cal Poly. And before entering public service, he served as the Director of Operations for Visits Locale. Some highlights of Brendan's career to date include assisting with the renewal effort for the countywide tourism and marketing district, overseeing and tracking Visits Locale's budget, modernizing the organization's expense report and AP tracking systems, human resource information system, and budgeting tracking system for the organization. And during his free time, he enjoys spending time with his wife and 2-year-old daughter, riding the Bob Jones Trail, going to the park, and watching Disney princess movies with them. I'd now like to turn it over to Brendan to share a few words.
Thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction. I'm so excited for this opportunity to be joining the city team, and I look forward to supporting the efforts and goals of the Parks and Rec Department and the Community Services Group.
Awesome. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, as well. Appreciated hearing about the Disney princess movies specifically. Okay, now is that time where we get to call upon the public for any public comment items that are not on the agenda. So those who would like to speak, this is your chance. Please raise your virtual hand, and we'll be calling 2 names at a time. So when your name is called, look for a pop-up and click where indicated so you can be promoted to a panelist to provide your comments. City Clerk, do we have any requests to speak at this time?
No, we do not.
Okay, that's easy on the first meeting. Well, I'm sure we'll get to hear more from the public at the next meeting. So we'll go ahead and move forward with the consent agenda. And consent agenda items consist of matters deemed routine and non-controversial by staff, unless a member of the council wishes to pull an item for individual consideration. All items will be approved by one motion. City Clerk, do we have anyone wanting to provide public comment on the consent agenda?
No, we do not.
All righty, Vice Mayor Christensen.
I'll go ahead and move the consent agenda. And thanks again to staff for all of the hard work that goes on behind the scenes. But it's nice to save it. We used to get all this stuff in meetings, so it's nice to save a little time and energy too.
Very
I'd
true.
like to second the motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks. All right, we have a motion by Vice Mayor Christensen and seconded by Councilmember Marks. City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Marks,
Yes.
Councilmember Pease,
Yes,
Councilmember Shorsman,
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. So we'll move forward to the public hearing and business items. We're going to introduce an ordinance or potentially introduce an ordinance amending the city's parking permit program for commercial properties. And let me just see as I toggle between screens, do we have staff ready to present the report? I see Gavin Hussey and Alex. Well, I kind of see Alex Fuchs. He's in the dark, but it's okay. And Matt Horn. Thank you so much for joining us in our first meeting of the year. Would you like to present the report?
Sure. Thank you for having us. So good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. Tonight, for council's consideration, we have a preferential parking permit program for commercial properties. And you may recall, this is the second time that council's seen this item. The first time was on August 24th. At that time, the ordinance was commingled with some residential parking district items as cleanup issues. Council reviewed this item and directed staff to return with a different version of the ordinance that really is kind of focused in on commercial properties, provided staff some flexibility to address issues, and recognizes that future changes may be necessary as we implement the long-term vision for the parking in San Luis Obispo, and that's really kind of driven by our parking and access management plan. So tonight we have both Gavin Hussey, the parking program manager, and Alex Fuchs, our parking services supervisor, to support the discussion on this item. Alex Fuchs will give the presentation, but before Alex presents, I'd like Gavin to provide council with an update on the parking and access management plan, and for the community's benefit, describe what the document will ultimately do to shape parking in San Luis Obispo.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Can you hear me okay? I do issue parking permits, so that is correct. Parking will be returning next Tuesday, January 18th, seeking additional direction on our request for a proposal of a new access and parking management plan. This document serves as the guiding force behind the city's parking services division. This document includes new division goals and incorporates industry-leading standards and practices. The plan is intended to provide city officials and staff guidance and direction to move towards a holistic approach for parking and mobility in San Luis Obispo. The access and parking management plan will provide guidance for council and staff on items like the preferential parking district that you'll be reviewing tonight. The request before you this evening is staff's recommendation to address issues presently facing our community. The policies identified in the access and parking management plan will take time to adopt and implement. Tonight's request serves to address needs of our community while working to develop the access and parking management plan and adopt overarching policies that align with city goals. I'll now turn it over to Alex Fuchs to deliver the presentation, which outlines the request to allow commercial properties the ability to participate in the districting process.
Thank you, Gavin. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, well, good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. Before you tonight is an item to introduce an ordinance amending the city's parking permit program for commercial properties. Staff's recommendation is for council to introduce an ordinance entitled an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Luis Obispo, amending Title 10, Chapter 36 of the San Luis Obispo Municipal Code to revise the city's parking permit program, allowing for the formation of preferential parking permit districts in commercial areas to address on-street parking impacts in those areas. So why are we here today? Well, staff is here to present proposed changes to the parking permit program to allow businesses to participate in the district formation process. Businesses are becoming impacted by parking from those that do not work or live in their area in a similar fashion as how residential areas have been impacted by non-resident parking for decades. The proposed changes include issuing permits for commercial properties directly to occupants instead of property owners, as well as issuing permits based on individual business needs instead of a set amount as the current municipal code language requires for existing residential districts. Staff will cover these elements in greater detail later in the report. So why are we not here today? So staff is not here to make modifications to existing residential districts, including the number of permits issued. Staff is also not here to recommend changes that will allow for the formation of mixed-use districts or districts that have a combination of both residential and commercial. Staff does, however, plan to return in March with specific recommendations to address those mixed-use type parking districts. Current parking district program elements include the formation of parking districts is limited to residential properties of 4 or fewer units, meaning multifamily and commercial properties are currently not allowed to participate in the formation process. Requests to establish parking districts are initiated by the occupants of a given area, and staff typically requires that at least 3 of those occupants meet and discuss their requests with staff to show that there's already a conversation amongst those neighbors about pursuing a parking district for their area. Voting to establish a parking district is done by the occupants since they're the ones that are directly affected by the establishment or the modification of a parking district. And at least 60% of responding occupants must support the formation or establishment of a parking district before a recommendation is made to council. And if a district is approved by council, then each separate address unit within the district boundaries will be issued a maximum of 2 permits each. And no exceptions are made unless otherwise approved by council. So the proposed amendments to the municipal code that staff is presenting tonight fall into 3 major categories. The first being allowing businesses to participate in the district formation process. The second being allowing staff to issue permits directly to the occupants of commercial properties instead of to the property owners. And 3, allowing permits to be issued on an individual needs basis for each business within a given commercial parking district. But please note that the proposed amendments would not apply to downtown businesses or any other areas where the city has already established paid parking. However, the proposed municipal code language does not explicitly state that. It can, however, be modified tonight to state it if council so wishes. So the first element, business participation in the district formation process. As staff mentioned earlier in the presentation, the city has received a request to establish a parking district in a predominantly commercial area. However, that is not currently allowed under the current municipal code language. The state of California, under their vehicle code section 22507, however, allows local authorities such as the city of San Luis Obispo to establish parking districts in predominantly or exclusively commercial areas. And this would improve the city's ability to address parking impacts, not only in residential areas, but also commercial areas as well. The second element of issuing permits directly to the occupants or tenants, as it's stated on the slide, as staff stated earlier, only the occupants are allowed to vote on the formation of a district, but the control of the permits is provided to the property owner. And staff believes that doing so in a commercial environment would be cumbersome and detrimental to the tenants or occupants of commercial properties. And so the proposal includes a recommendation to allow direct issuance to the occupants. Before permits would be issued, however, the tenants would have to provide a proof of occupancy, or whether that is a lease agreement, utility bill, or something of that nature that ties that individual business to the address within the district boundaries. Staff does want to note that this would not affect existing or future residential parking districts. Those would stay the same, where the control of the permits would be provided to the property owners. And the last major element of the proposed changes is approving the ability for staff to issue permits on a individual needs basis. And instead of adhering to a 2 permit limit, as the city currently does for residential properties, permits for commercial properties would be issued on the needs of the individual businesses, so that it does not adversely affect their staffing, operations, or anything else related to their business operations. And again, staff wants to note that the number of permits issued to existing and future residential parking districts would not change under these proposed amendments. So as I've alluded to in some of the previous slides, what would stay the same during the district formation process, these recommended changes would not affect residential parking districts. Multifamily properties of 4 or more units would still not be able to participate in the district formation process. And the forming, modifying, dissolving of parking districts would still require a 60% support of responding occupants. The municipal code changes also do not include any changes to the per permit fee, and it does not distinguish between residential permit fees versus commercial fees. That is contained within the comprehensive fee schedule that is adopted on an annual basis. And if changes want to be made to the fee amount, they would be done at that time when it's brought before council for consideration. So again, the recommendation is to introduce an ordinance amending Title 10, Chapter 36 of the city's municipal code to revise the city's parking permit program, allowing for the formation of preferential parking permit districts in commercial areas to address on-street parking impacts. And at this time, staff would like to open it up to council for comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a great report and all the thorough information. Just a quick question. Sorry, I'm stepping in first. Councilmember Shoresman, as far as enforcement, since this will be a whole different area, do we have to increase staff for that purpose?
So I'll tackle that, Mayor. So parking has increased our staffing levels to address some of the needs of our community. Right now, with our intent to transition to virtual permits next year, current staffing levels should be able to accommodate that. Our use of license plate recognition software will help us, identify violations in preferential parking districts faster than we currently do by visual patrols.
Great, thank you so much. Councilmember Shoresman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to staff in advance, or well, after the fact, because you already answered a lot of questions for me today. I really, really appreciate the work and energy you put into this. But as you were giving your presentation, the thought just occurred to me that I didn't really understand before so I just want to clarify. So what we're doing, or what you're proposing tonight, is a new ordinance that's similar to the residential parking district ordinance, but we're not amending the residential parking district ordinance. We're adding a new one that's similar, but for commercial districts, correct? So the other one for residential districts will still be in place, but this is an additional one that's similar.
The municipal code titles, chapters, and subsections would stay the same. Staff is proposing to add language specifically for commercial properties to allow separate and distinct parking districts to be established for those commercial uses. So there's language in there that applies to residential specifically, and then there's also separate language that applies specifically to commercial properties.
Okay, and then my second question is, you mentioned, one of you, can't remember if it was Gavin or Alex, but one of you mentioned that it wouldn't be a set number of permits per unit or per business. And so I'm wondering, how would you determine the number of permits? How would we do that objectively so as not to favor one business or another? What's the plan for that?
Yeah, so the intent is for staff to verify the actual curvature and how many parking spaces are out there, and then make a distinction based on that. We have looked at methods to utilize the actual square footage of each business and break it out that way. There are other methods based on us meeting with each of the occupants to decide what is needed by all the businesses in the area. Some businesses do require more, some do require less. At that point, we would, issue permits to the business directly, and if they chose to allow other people to participate and use some of their permits, we could authorize that.
I do want to expand upon that and say that if there was a district that had enough support to go to council for recommended establishment, that council could at that time weigh in on the number of permits that are provided. That number wouldn't be set by staff. There would just be a recommendation made by staff.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all my questions right now.
Thank you, Councilmember Pease.
Great. Thank you so much and for bringing this forward. So I have a couple of questions. The first is that I have, in my experience as we set the residential districts, that there's a certain flexibility that I wish staff had after the fact. So the way it's currently set up is that the staff comes with a recommendation after all that background about how the new district will be set up. And then once it's in place, it seems like sometimes a little bit of tweaking in terms of exactly where or how many permits or, some other aspect of that. And so my question is maybe perhaps a little procedural is I would be interested in language, something to the effect of that within the goals of the district, that the city manager or designee would have flexibility to adjust within certain parameters. Is that the type of thing that would need to go in the ordinance modifications, or for a specific district, we could put that into the resolution to kind of have the parameters of what could be adjusted after the fact?
I'm actually not sure on that. Alex, are you aware whether it has to go in the municipal code?
Maybe that's a city attorney, city manager kind of question.
And so we can look at adding some language to the code that references some general authority. And then I would recommend that the council, in looking at the individual district applications, set the parameters clearly through the resolution process.
So would we need to add some language to the ordinance, or could we, within the specific district resolution, kind of build that in?
I will take a look at that as you continue to discuss.
Okay, great, thank you. And then my second question is, it sounds like there's been I understand that there's been a specific request for a district already. And I'm wondering, well, generally, what's the timing of that we anticipate that could come forward? Is it, several months from now, or is it just kind of right on the heels? And the corollary question with that is, as you alluded to, that there's kind of a rolling out of different technologies. I'm wondering, is the new district going to be is the new technology going to be right on the heels of this new district, and so that it's worth kind of implementing everything at once rather than like, here we are for 2 months and then we're changing to this other thing 2 months later,
Yep. So I'll take that, Councilmember Pease. So it is a several month process for us to implement a parking district. It does require us to go out and meet with property owners or tenants and get buy-in from them. We do have to go through a mailing process and get the votes back in. And then it's several months for us to actually establish the district after council approves it. So it is a rather lengthy process. What I'll say with regard to the new technology that we're rolling out is we're going to try to do this in tandem with the current technology that we're using with hang tag permits and stuff like that. I do think that it is a benefit for us to operate both facets simultaneously so that customers still have what is convenient for them, but also start to adopt the new technology. So it's not just an overnight switch and you flip it and it changes for them. So there has to be a learning period where people become comfortable with the new technology that we're using, learn how to go online and make their purchases online, or still come into the office to purchase their permits and associate their vehicle with the permit in the office here. So we'll run them both simultaneously. We did start requesting some vehicle owner information from some of our residential groups this past year, so we could start doing some testing on the back end so that our process is vetted before it actually rolls out and is live.
Great, thanks. Those were my questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Yeah, today during agenda review, staff was saying that this is a one-year pilot program, and I haven't heard that tonight. Is this a one-year pilot program that we're looking at?
So it is in place for the next year. Our intent is that the access and parking management plan will provide the guidance and documentation that we'll be moving forward with as the city and for the parking division. So the policies that are established in the access and parking management plan will eventually supersede all these plans if council adopts it once it's presented.
So yes or no? Is it a pilot program? Yes or no?
It is a pilot program, Councilmember Marks, for the next year. And if council changes the policies in the parking access plan, either modify or eliminate this program, or it will continue as adopted tonight.
Okay, I just think it's important to include that in whatever approval language we might make tonight, or, you know, just so that the public knows what we're up to here. I had earlier asked the question about limiting these commercial districts to areas that do not have paid parking programs. In other words, not in the downtown or where we have parking meters or parking kiosks, but we're looking at areas of the city that have right now no regulated paid parking. And I wanted to know if that is correct.
Yes. So,
go ahead.
my apologies. Yes, Councilmember Marks. So staff did indicate that we could amend the language of 10.36.170B and section 4 to read that that the area under consideration is not currently designated as paid parking, but could be an area with existing preferential parking permits. And that would cover that, which you discussed earlier.
Okay, and going back to the number of permits, I see under section 5, 10.36.220 that the ordinance, the proposed ordinance says that it's limited to 2 preferential parking permits to the registered property owner or the registered property owner's representatives is authorized in writing. And yet earlier, folks have been saying that it would be kind of up to the discretion of staff if they needed more parking permits. And so I'm confused now about what are you talking about in terms of the number of permits?
Yep. So Councilmember Marks, that is where we tried to break out the difference between residential areas and commercial areas. So that language is specifically for the residential areas that are still only going to be issued 2 permits, The language for the commercial areas does indicate that there won't be a set number of permits issued.
Okay, that's not really clear from the language. I think the heading needs to come back, residential parking permit issuance in that section, so that the average person reading this would know, oh, this section applies to residential, this other section applies to commercial. Just for clarity. Again, when you're talking about tenants as being the people who would vote on this, in some places you're talking about owners or registered owners or people who are appointed as the representative of the registered property owner, and elsewhere you're talking about tenants. And I think that that language just needs to be regularized and, you know, the same throughout so that it's not confusing. You're talking about a business in a commercial area where the business owner may not be the property owner. And so that's pretty clear. But just by calling them different names throughout the ordinance, I think that's confusing. And I wondered if there would be a problem to make that language more uniform.
We can try to clean that up for you and send over another draft if that's what you wish.
Well, so Gavin, just so we're clear, we're at a public hearing and introduction tonight, so we can't send over another draft. What would the process would be tonight, and I would recommend, Madam Mayor, is if there are changes to the ordinance that staff want to make, is I would suggest ask questions right now during this phase. Then we can go into public comment, and if there's specific directions of staff, we can either offer recommendations to language changes tonight and during the meeting, or we can take a break and we can trail this item to the end of the evening and come back with specific language changes.
Okay, and then as to the cost of these commercial permits, this is something to be deferred to the time that we would have an actual application for a commercial parking district. Is that correct? Or is this something we need to address in this ordinance?
No, oh, go ahead, Gavin.
Sorry. So the fees are in the master fee schedule, and that's where they reside. It currently is the same rate as the residential permit.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
And Madam Mayor and Councilmember Marks, the reason we do that is if the council wants to change the rate, we don't have to go through a whole ordinance noticing adoption process. And then all of the fees are then centrally located in a master fee resolution that's brought forward. So we have a comprehensive compendia of all the fees for the city.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Councilmember Marks, as far as the owner versus tenant clarity, do you have a specific suggestion you'd like to offer?
I'd like to wait till the comment period. Right now I'm trying to just ask questions.
Yep, I just wasn't sure if you still had more questions around that based on which direction you were going. Okay, thank you.
No, I'm just looking for consistency, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay, we'll move forward to public comment. If there's anyone who would like to provide public comment now that they've heard everything they can about the commercial parking district, please raise your virtual hand if you'd like to speak on this item. We'll be calling two names at a time. When your name is called, look for a pop-up and click where indicated so you can be promoted to a panelist to provide your comments. City Clerk, do we have requests to speak at this time?
I'm not seeing any, so no.
Okay. And we'll move back to staff. Did you have any other response you wanted to add right now based on the questions that were asked? Okay.
Actually,
Madam Mayor, I did want to just circle back
Mhm.
briefly on the question regarding delegation to staff to change boundaries or numbers of permits issued. I think that the ordinance currently says that the resolution shall set forth the boundaries. And I think that within the context of that resolution, if there were specific parameters by which that boundary was allowed to, the council wanted to consider expanding it in response to a certain set of circumstances, perhaps that you heard through public comment in a particular district, there is the flexibility to do that within the context of the resolution as currently drafted. The days and hours are pretty specific to, those need to be the ones that were subject to the 60% vote as the ordinance is currently drafted. So if the council was desiring to create greater flexibility there, I think we need to probably take some time as a staff and consider some alternatives for you there. And then Mr. Horn, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
oh, no, thank you for that. You know, and going through the permit issuance section of the draft ordinance, I see registered property owner, I see registered property owner as representative. And then I also see occupant used, and they're used in three different kind of distinct rationales. I'm not seeing the conflict. So Councilmember Marks, could you point to me where you're seeing the issue so we could try to address that tonight?
No, I haven't gone through. What I've just noticed is that they keep changing. So I think that that's something that I haven't gone through and edited the ordinance myself in that
sure.
regard. But you have, you know, generally like with these commercial big industrial areas, you've got somebody who may own the whole thing. Then you've got business owners, and the business owner may or may not be the person who's actually, maybe the person who's got the lease, but it may not be the person who's actually occupying the office. You know what I'm saying? So there's a bunch of different, and so it just needs to be clear who is qualified to vote. Is it the owner? You know, in the residential, it's clear in the residential parking districts. I just found that it you know, it's something that needs to be looked at and cleaned up, in my opinion. If you want me to do that during the break, I can try.
No, I just thought you had some specific
You're
examples.
talking about 60% of addressed units. Then this is down in 10.36.170, number 2. It used to be number 3. 60% majority of addressed units. So there's addressed units, and we're talking about the registered owner or the registered property owner's appointed representative here. And then other places you're talking about the occupants.
Yep. So Councilmember Marks, I think what you're looking at is the section that's related to residential properties. Section B there, we are identifying commercial properties. So that might be where the confusion is coming from. We are trying to break out both parties individually and talk about each group distinctly. We're not trying to have policies that muddy the water between commercial and residential.
And if I may, Madam Mayor and Councilman Mark, I think that what you're seeing is that there are distinct terms with distinct meanings. And that is intentional because they have different meaning for purposes of who is authorized to request and or be issued permits. And so that's why there is not harmony amongst the terms, because there are different parties' interest at play that require us to have distinct terms so that there's distinguishing characteristic between them.
Okay, then my comment would be that you need to have a definition section in the ordinance so that that's clear. And also headings that in some way indicate whether you're talking about a residential parking area or a commercial one. And the other comment that I wanted to make is that I think it's really good to modify the ordinance to say that this does not apply to paid parking areas of the city, or where there is a parking plan, because I could see a situation where say a block in the downtown would want to be able to reserve parking just for its employees. And for years and years and years, what we've been struggling with, getting the employees to park in the parking structure or use the Gold Pass and take the bus so that the on-street parking is available for customers and visitors, and where there would be a high turnover of this on-street parking rather than having cars just parked there all day. I do think that that's a very good idea to modify it.
Thank you. I think if we were to have those almost labels in a sense of commercial versus residential, I think that would make some more sense. But Councilmember Pease.
Thank you, and thank you for the clarifications. I think that it's going to be tricky, and I will be supporting the ordinance. I think that I'm really looking forward to the access and management plan. And so although this is not written specifically as a pilot program, I think we're kind of under a collective understanding that once the new program comes over, that will supersede. And so to have this period of kind of, trying it out and seeing, what are those nuances between of how to find an equitable number of permits, et cetera. So I fully, and I appreciate the embracing of, let's try and see how we can do that. So I don't think we need to add any specific language that this is a pilot program. That's not in the ordinance, is my understanding, and I don't think we need to. I do support, I don't, it might be redundant, but the adding that language that Gavin outlined about that this wouldn't apply to places that already have, paid, that we already have parking meters or some other limitation. So I'm fine to include that language. I think if it's, if staff feels it's appropriate and consistent with other ordinances, that I would be fine with an adding a definition section. I don't think we need to, I think that can be direction without having to pull this item for later consideration. And maybe that will be enough. But if headings, if a formatting something would help for clarity, I would certainly leave that to staff discretion as well, without changing the substance of the ordinance itself. That covers the potential changes. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Shorsman.
Yes, thank you. And once again, I do want to thank staff for all the attention to my questions earlier today. I generally approve of the concept and the theory and principle behind this ordinance, and will approve it in whatever language it ends up being. I did appreciate Councilmember Pease's questions about procedure and the need for flexibility. I asked some questions of staff earlier about fee amounts and numbers of permits, and I think that was partially because me trying to understand how this would actually work on the ground with, we know how it works with residences because we've been doing it for a little while, but other jurisdictions have probably done it with businesses, but we haven't. So I was trying to get a little bit of clarity about that. And I do worry a little bit about fairness and objectivity in the distribution of permits. So, but now I understand a little more that council might have some more discretion when these resolutions come forward for these districts. I do also agree with Councilmember Marks, though, in some of the comments that were made about clarity. I did not understand the difference. I didn't go through and wordsmith. I did provide a couple of examples to staff where I thought language was confusing, but I didn't go through and redline all the different references to residential versus commercial, but I did find some of that confusing and just hard to differentiate. I didn't realize, for example, that it wasn't 2 permits for everybody, whether it was a business or a resident. So that was a little bit confusing to me. So I would recommend that there is some proofreading and clarifying and looking for the word residential and making sure it belongs where it should be residential, and small changes like that, or putting some sort of headings or definitions to add some clarity. But I do think this is a good thing and it's going the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Christensen.
Yes, thank you very much. I remember talking about this last August and appreciating that there were some real issues with some of our commercial districts that this ordinance is meant to address. So I appreciate staff bringing this back, and I know that they have been working a lot with those businesses and stakeholders, and I do like, so I appreciate that very much. And of course will, not of course, but I will be supporting the ordinance. I would like to have the language that Gavin talked about with that explicitly said that it does not apply where the city already has paid parking districts or areas, streets or whatever. I think that's just a helpful thing to do. And then reading, in reading, for instance, section 5, let's just say, that would be on page, I'm looking at page 236 of 466, 236. You know, you could see there's 2 different paragraphs. One of them talks about residential, and they are long sentences, but it says residential, 2 parking permits. And then there's a second paragraph that's been added. It's underlined, you can see, and it says commercial. So they are divided and you have to read them carefully. If people think that this is confusing, I think it would be just, you know, put a thing at the heading at the beginning, instead of saying the Director of Public Works, just say residential, semicolon, the Director of Public Works will annually issue 2 preferential, and then the next paragraph say commercial, or and then colon, and the Director of Public Works or the you know, or their designee will annually issue any number of preferential parking permits. So it's permits. It's not really confusing once you figure out that each of these sections has two separate sections. One of them being strictly residential and one of them being strictly commercial, but I understand where the concern is coming from. And I think it's something very simple like that without us having to, we don't have to wordsmith it. If people feel like that would be helpful, that's something could be done in a couple of those paragraphs where there's 2 separate discussions going on. Just goes to show you when you try to consolidate and streamline, sometimes you just streamline a little bit too much. Other than that, I think it's, you know, I think it's a good job, and we'll look forward to seeing what we actually come up with a proposed parking district, and then look forward to our parking and access overhaul later this year, or early next year.
Thank you. Same, I also really think we should include the downtown slower regulated paid parking in the resolution or the ordinance. And the pilot program part, since it's not clear, while we know today that we're planning to change the parking, or look into the parking management plan, if something were to happen and that wasn't happening tomorrow or next week, I just don't know that it's very clear that this is a pilot program. So I think it would be good to have it at least like in a intro to the resolution or something. I don't know how we could do that, but I see Derek, you have your hand up, so maybe you could share on that.
Yeah, I would just recommend it can be part of the motion that, you know, as you know, adopted ordinance is a 1-year pilot program. and then it's in the minutes in the record. And then what we do is we calendar this. And for pilot programs, we typically come back. So let's say in a scenario, we're not back with the downtown and access and parking plan before January of 2023, then, we'll come back and say, okay, we didn't get that downtown, the access and parking plan adopted. What shall we do with the pilot ordinance? But building in the ordinance, then, if we do that, then there's the chance we have to have a first and second reading to continue the program. And I think the council can just make a decision at that time if they want to rescind or modify or just continue with the ordinance as is if we don't have a access and parking plan in place by then.
That works for me. Thank you.
On
Go ahead.
that issue, Madam Mayor, if I may, before you leave that topic, I just want to make sure that we're clear as a staff on if you decide not to do anything, are we coming back and then rescinding existing districts created pursuant to this program? Is that the intention, Mr. City Manager?
Yeah, so let's say in this scenario, a year from now, we don't have a downtown and access plan, and we're not modifying any of the districts that are in place because of that plan. We come back to the council and the council says the pilot program hasn't worked. We don't want to have it continue. We're going to rescind the ordinance, and then we would have to unwind the commercial parking program or in place.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page about the path forward in that circumstance, because obviously the ordinance as currently drafted doesn't say it shall expire in 2023 by its own language.
Right. That was part of my concern is I understand what you're saying around the ordinance and the second reading and having to go through that process all over again, but I don't, similar in the realm of trying to make things more clear, wanting to make sure that it's clear. Anyway, Councilmember Pease.
Yeah, I guess I'm really not convinced that this needs to be a pilot program versus, I mean, we're amending an ordinance that's filled with all kinds of other information. So it's not like, oh, this is a standalone thing. We're kind of, having this piece. So for me, it doesn't help to make it a pilot program. And if it's taking 7 months to establish a district, then, how are people going to go forward with any kind of confidence? I mean, basically what we're saying is we will likely make significant changes to our parking and access program once we have this study, but we don't know if that's going to be later this year or 2 years from now. So I would rather just leave it as an ordinance modification, unless I'm missing what it would help to make it a pilot program specifically.
Yeah, it seems like we'd have to know a year from the actual action or final implementation. Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And this was related to a question for perhaps the city manager or the city attorney. Could we just add a recommendation for council's consideration, directing staff to return with this item in a period of 12 months or with the parking and access management plan?
Yeah, that's what we've typically done, is just return back within a year, and we've reported either via council memo or with an item. I mean, a lot of times we move forward with these programs and they work out swimmingly, and we just keep them in place. And sometimes they don't work out well and staff knows it. And so we come back with, hey, it's been a year and here's suggested changes. But in this instance, we've got the variable with the downtown access and parking plan. So if we don't show up with changes before then, we'll at least at a minimum report back to the council on the progress of the program.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, that would make sense to me, to just have it returned to council, in a year, and for a reality check. And the reason I brought up the pilot thing is that during the agenda review, staff kept saying it is a pilot program, it's a pilot program, but it didn't say it in the ordinance. So that's why I really feel we need to be clear about what we're up to. And I agree with Councilmember Pease that we don't want to consider the residential parking districts policy that's been in place for decades to be part of a pilot program. Part that I understood this morning, staff was referring to as a pilot program was just the commercial aspect. So I think rather than muddying the waters, having it come back to us in a year with an assessment of how it's actually working, and you know, hopefully that will be coupled with the parking, well, the access. We used to call it demand reduction or something like that. Used to be the PDAP. When that comes back to us, then we can look at how are these commercial parking districts actually working. So in concept, I really support the idea of trying it out and seeing how it works. So
Great, thank you.
I'm okay with a recommendation that it comes back in a year or something like that.
City Manager, did you still have a comment or question?
No, my apologies. I'm sorry.
No worries. And going back to the fact that we don't have tenants involved in the commercial aspect, I understand in the residential, it makes perfect sense. I'm wondering, because we say no exception, I'm wondering if we're in a space where a tenant's been in a building for a long time and they don't really see their property owners at all. We don't have any connection with the property owners. I picture that being a potential problem in the future, but that's so minute of an issue. It's not probably meant for this moment. Councilmember Pease.
I'm ready to make a motion unless there's additional discussion.
All right, let me just add two more thoughts here.
Go for it.
So I also just really wanted to kind of echo the interest in tying in the implementation of the technology along with these districts. I know that the current parking process rollout was a little challenging downtown, so I'd like to not also have that happen again with the commercial districts and the new change in technology. And then as far as the public comment on the parking management plan, will there be an opportunity to have like a open town hall kind of thing again, or would that be only public comment in next week's meeting?
So Mayor, the vendor that we choose to provide the plan will do open studies with the general public.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm ready for your motion, Councilmember Pease.
All right, thanks. I'd like to move that we go ahead and introduce the ordinance as written with the addition of the language Gavin introduced about that it's not for restricted, existing restricted parking, and that staff report report back to council after 1 year of implementation, and that do we even need to add into the motion something about clarifying language or definitions or anything like that?
That'll just be staff guidance.
And a request for staff to add clarifying formatting as needed, or add update formatting as needed for clarification.
Mr. Horn. Oh, and he's gone.
No, I was just going to add. So the previous recommendation was for 1036-2022-220, the first paragraph to add residential colon in a space, and for the second paragraph to have commercial colon in a space for clarifying documentation. So if that's what you wanted to add, that's the information.
I felt like that was an example. And I see Christine kind of popping on and off to, you know, yes, I would like to add that, but I don't know if adding those kinds of words, you know, at the second reading, if we can review for clarification, or does it need to be exact right now? And maybe that's it. And then for the second reading, we can add in some, if we still don't feel comfortable with this, with the clarification at the second reading, we can make those kinds of modifications then. Is that the way to do it?
If there are truly like clerical changes, those can be made upon second reading. Substantive changes would need to be reintroduced. So if there's wholesale redrafting of sections for that purpose, as I took a run through from the perspective that the council's been discussing, I didn't see that. And I think the clarification that was recommended earlier by Councilmember Christensen or Vice Mayor Christensen does address the concern that there's a distinction in Section 5 between commercial and residential, specifically as to how many permits are going to be issued. But if there were broader concerns, other than just, add a header for clarity, which I would consider a clerical amendment, we would need to reintroduce.
All right, so, subject to my colleagues' further clarifications, I would then limit the motion proposed right now that rather than vague language about formatting, et cetera, would be the specific modifications that Matt Horn just outlined, and that would be all.
Great, thank you. Vice Mayor Christensen.
I'll second. Thank you.
Thank you. I see there are still hands up. Do we need to move on in this motion, or can we pause for the comments that we may have?
I just wanted to, I just wondered if we could also add a definition section. It would really be small, but just again, so that people understand when.
That was the point of the headers, would be to not have to do the definitions, but.
Yeah, Jan, I understand what you're saying, but I think if a person is, if you're looking at just once, what people are going to do is, if they're residents, they're going to look at the residential part. If they're businesses, they're going to look at the business part. So they're not really going to be blending them all together. And within each one of those discussions, those meetings are pretty clear. They always have been. We haven't ever had to have definition. So I think that would be not, I don't think it's necessary. I think we're good if we just make sure that people understand we're now talking about two different kinds of parking districts, and they'll be looking at the one that applies to them. I don't think they're going to get confused about occupants and tenants and property owners and business owners, things like that. I think we're good, personally.
Can I clarify? So it wasn't just that Section 5. I don't think that what Vice Mayor Christensen and I are saying is different. I think throughout the ordinance where there's differences in treatment between the way residential permits and commercial permits would be treated, I think there should just be headings added for clarification. I don't know if it's just Section 5 or not.
There aren't very many other places where it's that different, but whatever. It's just like, you gotta, if you want specific words changed, you gotta find out where they are and point them out. That's the idea. You got to read this stuff and say what it is you want. And, that's the only place I could find where it seemed to be confusing to me. It's just that one paragraph.
Well, if I can comment, staff did say earlier that they're very specific terms and that they were quite deliberate when they're talking about a tenant, that they're not talking about somebody who rents a commercial office, although that person might consider him or herself a tenant.
They use the word tenant when they're talking about.
See, what I'm saying is that if they just had a definition section that a tenant means somebody who's living, who's renting a residential unit.
Okay.
The staff has internally made decisions about the specific language, and they've been quite deliberate about it. And I think if they just would share that information with the public, it's a little short section, it would prevent future distress on the part of people who are trying to figure out what the heck is the city up to. So,
City Manager.
Yeah, I just want to back up a little bit, so how we do definitions in a municipal code is, we've got the municipal code and then we have title and chapters. And so every title has a definition sections. The definitions don't live within the chapters. So we're specifically proposing to amend a chaptered section. Chapter 10 does have a list of definitions. They're fairly, it's fairly confined, and most of the terms for the previous parking program were not defined whatsoever. So when we looked at the drafting this ordinance, we didn't feel as if there was a need in the past for definitions. And so we don't think that there's a need today, that these are fairly self-explanatory terms. The terms that are defined in the definition section that I'm referring to, chapter 10.04, are terms where there are terms that are analogous to what you find in the government code, public resources code, et cetera, where there could be some confusion, and we have a local application of that definition. So if the council wants us to, we can do that. It would just require us to come back with a separate ordinance and bring forward changes to chapter 10.04 to provide a number of definitions that we haven't previously defined before tonight.
Based on the current motion that is on the floor, we were talking about the headings. Councilmember Pease, do you wish to change your motion in any way, shape, or form, or can we move forward with the roll call?
I'd like to move forward with a roll call, and I think that I think we have an opportunity to review a clean copy after this, and if we find that we have some ongoing concern, I think we can do that after the fact. But what I'm hearing from staff is we have although maybe not obvious in every regard, I think we have a consistent, legally enforceable ordinance in front of us with the modifications that we've made. And so I'd like to go forward with the motion as I have it.
Great. Madam Mayor and Councilmember Pease, we've heard your direction that additional clarity, just in terms of clerical clarity, might be helpful. And so we can take another run through the ordinance with an eye towards those concerns and see if there are additional opportunities for headings or further clarification that don't alter substance. And those are permissible upon an adoption.
That would be
Perfect.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor from Councilmember Pease and seconded by Vice Mayor Christensen. City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Pease,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Marks,
Yes.
Councilmember Shorsman,
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes, motion passes. Well, thank you very much to all the staff on this hard work, and we look forward to seeing you all back next week for the parking management plan discussion. And on this moment at 7:45, I'm going to go ahead and take a break. So let's all be back at 7:55. Sound good? Okay, do we have the staff that we will be presenting on item 6B, 3580 and 3584 Bullock Lane?
Coming over right now.
Perfect. Hello, Rachel. Hello, Michael. Okay, so this public hearing item before us is to review the mixed use development project at 3580 and 3584 Bullock Lane. I'd like to ask each council member, starting with Vice Mayor Christensen, for their ex parte disclosures of contact with anyone who has provided information to council members not on the record, so the information may be used as part of their decision-making process.
No ex parte.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks?
I have had no ex parte contact with anyone about this.
Thank you. Councilmember Pease?
No ex parte.
And Councilmember Shorsman?
No ex parte here either.
Okay, and none for me as well. Will staff please present the report?
Sure, I'll go ahead and introduce this item. Mayor Stewart, it's Michael Codron, Director of Community Development, and I'm here with Rachel Cohen, who's an associate planner and the project planner for the project. She was supported by John Rickenbach, who isn't able to be here tonight. Rachel, just want to give you a heads up that you're on presenter view, so you might want to, under display settings, you can switch screens so we're getting the presentation.
Thank you. Let me switch that.
Top left.
Not finding it.
Does it say display settings there to the left of your cursor? I think that's where it is.
Yeah, I just see, let's see. Let me just do this. I'll probably. All right, let me try sharing this again. Sorry about that. Is that better? Or is it still doing the separate?
Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Good evening, Madam Mayor and fellow council members. This evening we are, or you are reviewing the Bullock Ranch Mixed Use Project. I'll be here presenting on the project and telling you a little bit about this. Staff is recommending that the council adopt the draft resolution, which is the attachment A in the staff report, approving the development, which includes allowing live work units within 50 feet of the street and a sign program, approving a vesting tentative tract map, approving a summary abandonment of 30 feet offer of dedication, and then adopting a mitigated negative declaration. The project is located within the Orchid Area Specific Plan. It's located between Bullock Lane and Ranch House Road. The project is almost 11 acres in size and currently has 2 vacant homes, a barn and accessory structure, as well as 56 trees on site. In the general plan, the project land uses are identified as medium high density residential and community commercial, and the zoning is medium high density residential with a community commercial mixed use portion of the site. The surrounding uses are a mixture of new residential development, as well as the Union Pacific Railroad and Bullock Lane. We have north of the project, some single family residences and mobile home park, and then south of the project is residential units under construction as part of the Rigetti development. The project includes 192 residential units. Those are broken down into 88 bungalows, 96 townhouse apartments. And then there are 7 live work units and a residential unit along Ranch House Road. There's also a 585 square foot commercial unit. And then the project also includes a community center that has a fitness center, leasing office, a swimming pool, and then throughout the project itself, there's some landscaped hangout areas, tot lots, and a shaded community space. The project includes a common interest airspace subdivision, which includes easements for shared driveways and parking spaces. And then also the project includes infrastructure and roadway improvements, including the Bullock Lane improvements, which would allow Bullock Lane to go all the way through, and a bike path extension along Bullock Lane. The project includes 3 styles of housing and a mixture of architectural styles. The live work units, which are outlined here, are located along Ranch House Road and utilize a farmhouse style architecture. This is
designed to be compatible with the project that's adjacent to the south. And then the bungalows are a combination of California Mission and Mission Ranch architecture style. And then the townhomes are a California Mission design. So the applicant in their project has provided some nice renderings. This one is of the live work units along Ranch House Road. This is a rendering of the bungalow units. And then this slide is showing the townhouse apartments. The project does include 7 affordable units that are distributed throughout the site. You notice in the staff report that overall the project had a total of 27 units, and then with the inclusion of table 2A, that total number was 7, and 2 of them are low income units and 5 are moderate income units. The tree committee, the ARC, and the planning commission reviewed various aspects of the project and found the project was consistent with city programs, policies, regulations, and design guidelines as per their purviews. The planning commission provided 2 specific directional items as they made their recommendation to the applicant as well as to council. One was that a tot lot be incorporated into the project, and that the small 38 square foot balconies within the townhome design be expanded to allow for better usability. The planning commission also provided feedback that Bullock Lane could potentially be made slightly narrower to allow for a continuous 12-foot wide bike path. So in response to the planning commission direction and feedback, the project applicant has proposed minor changes to their project. The first one is the inclusion of a tot lot, and this slide shows you the location of that proposed tot lot. The applicant has not proposed a specific design or minimum size, and so staff is recommending condition of approval number 24. The staff report says number 34, so I apologize, but if you look in the resolution, condition of approval 24 outlines basic design and size parameters for the tot lot to the satisfaction of the community development director, so that when that project comes in for building permits, there's some guidance on what that tot lot should be. In regards to the townhouse apartment balconies, the applicant has modified the project and increased the size of the smaller balconies from 38 square feet to 51 square feet. And this design increases the depth of those balconies by over a foot. Based on the comments from the Planning Commission regarding the previous design of the bike path, the applicant has revised the design of Bullock Lane that allows them to provide a bike path that can accommodate a 12-foot wide bike path. So they've been able to redesign Bullock Lane and allow for a continuous 12-foot path. And staff is supportive of all the proposed modifications made by the applicant in response to Planning Commission direction and feedback. The Planning Commission found the project to be consistent with all applicable city policies, programs, and standards. Details on this analysis are provided in the council agenda report, as well as the Planning Commissioner's report. A draft mitigated negative declaration was prepared and circulated for 30 days, starting in November. The draft M&D tiered off of the Orchid area specific plans final EIR that was certified in 2009. The draft M&D determined that with the incorporation of the mitigation measures that are included in the resolution, potential impacts of the project will be less than significant. One comment letter was received regarding the M&D from the Air Pollution Control District, and that response letter was included as part of the packet. Response to the APCD's comments were provided, but there were no revisions necessary to either the analysis or the required mitigation measures for the M&D. So with that, staff again is recommending that the council approve the project. This concludes staff's presentation, and staff is available for any questions from the council. Thank you.
Thank you. What a great report. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Pease.
Thank you for that. We received a comment from Leah Brooks that she was making a suggestion about the bike path and negotiation with the railroad, et cetera, that maybe there should be some language on the approval. I can pull up the specific request, or maybe you're familiar enough with the comment to address that. Sorry, the feline interruption.
Yeah, and Luke Shorts is on the is with us this evening as well. So I'm going to actually have him respond to that comment since he has more information regarding the process with Union Pacific.
Great, thank you.
Everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. Great question, Councilmember Pease. I did see that comment as well, and we've looked into this. Just a little background, the way that we've drafted the conditions is to provide an incentive for the developer to work aggressively in coordination with the city to get this bike path built. It's a huge gap closure that's really important to us in the railroad trail. But also providing some flexibility that we know this requires some coordination and approval with Union Pacific Railroad, which is not a slam dunk. Although we have a good relationship and have been successful with similar projects recently. So the way that the condition mentioned in the public comment, which is condition number 83 part G, talks about the timing. And it basically says, hey, the city, we're actually already coordinating with Union Pacific. We're gonna work as aggressively as we can to procure the right-of-way agreement needed with them to allow the developer to construct the path. So we have a time frame from the point where we have plans that are developed at the detail that we need to be able to make those negotiations happen in more detail. We have 2 years to get to that point where we have the agreement. And the way the conditions written currently is if we're unsuccessful, if Union Pacific just flat out says, no, we don't want to cooperate with you on this project, that in addition to that 2-year sunset, at any time, the public works director could say, hey, we've been told this is infeasible, let's shift approaches. And as currently drafted, the public works director would have the discretion to confirm that it's infeasible and we'd have to shift the approach to try to accomplish that connection. The request from a member of the community was that, hey, let's change that to the city council. If this isn't infeasible, Union Pacific says, no, it's not happening. Their ask is that we come back to the council to communicate that and provide a recommendation on what our path forward would be. There's some other design solutions we've considered that would be much more costly, much more challenging than just working with UP, as strange as that sounds, because that's an effort on its own. But it would require other decisions that we need to come forward and say, hey, if it's not the path we want to try to move forward with, it's not feasible, here's an approach we need to take. And that approach would probably be best led as a city project moving forward aside from this development. So if it's the council's determination that they would like to see that come back to communicate that decision to them, I'm fine with that if that's what the majority of you would support.
And is it fair to say that that kind of change would come before council in our capital improvement program anyway for review and discussion?
Yes, just to give a little more detail, if we are unsuccessful with Union Pacific and we really only need a little sliver where we have to shift the path a little bit to the west and to the right of way to cross a creek, The other alternative design is completely reconstructing the culvert that crosses that creek, shifting the whole road to the east, which impacts some other existing residential homes. We'd like to not go that route. So if we were coming back, as written currently, we'd still come back to say, hey, we're going to put in a CIP request because we have an alternative design we want to start working through to deliver with the city. Our intent and the applicant's intent is to deliver this path if we can get there efficiently, which is both our goals. If it's not doable with working with Union Pacific as part of this project, it would still be a high priority for the city. It's not something we would dust our hands and just say, we're done, we tried. We would find another way to achieve this connection.
Gotcha. Okay,
And I-
great. Thanks. Oh,
If I could
sorry.
just add a little, just a comment there on this being, an important partnership project as it relates to our capital improvement plan, in that there's funding from a lot of different sources to complete the improvement, but it's significant enough of an improvement, and this is a significant enough of a project that we can require the developer to design and construct, and provide them reimbursement credits from all those different sources in terms of the people that are responsible for fully paying for the improvement. What we don't want to do is sort of tie the approval to construction of the improvement, because then the project will not move forward. It won't go past, the tonight's meeting if that's the requirement. They'll wait until the right-of-way can be acquired or the design is changed, and then they'll move forward once they have that certainty. So we want to continue to work together and make progress on both housing and important infrastructure. And so this condition was written to accomplish both.
Great. Thanks for the clarification on both accounts. I appreciate that. And then my only other question, and it's more of a curiosity, is if the, obviously this is a lot of new homes, and I'm wondering if they'll be all electric, if they are going to be, what the timing would be, if we already know their intent for all electric, and or are they, is their timing going to be such that they would be bound by any modifications to our potential modifications to our Clean Energy Choice program?
That's a good question. My understanding with the applicant is that they want to follow the city's code, but I would like to defer to the applicant to respond to your question, if that's okay, since they have a little better idea of what their goal is. I think they will be better at articulating that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my understanding from discussions with staff that the developer would only be responsible for the percentage that is their fair share of the railroad safety bicycle trail. So do we have any idea what percentage that would be at this point? That's my first question. I do have a second one, so yes.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. The costs for this segment of the railroad trail are built into a combination of two of our impact fee programs. So our citywide traffic impact fee program and the Orchid area specific plan traffic impact fee program. So if they were not conditioned to construct the project, their fair share is built into that. They'd pay their fees and it'd be captured that way. The way that the approach would work with this is that they would build the path and receive credits equivalent to the cost of that path towards the fees that they would be obligated to pay, which exceed what the estimated cost for the path. So they'll still be paying in to the fee programs beyond that cost to handle their share of other citywide transportation improvements. I haven't calculated their specific percentage fair share, but I'd be happy to do that. I could probably do that back a napkin during this discussion if that's desired.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and my second question, I was happy to see that these affordable units are actually going to be built rather than just having them contribute to a fund, to our housing fund, which is important also, but we need the units, we need the affordable housing. And I was concerned at the reading the staff report, the way that the requirement for affordable housing has gone down and down and down over the years. And I wonder if staff could explain why the required number of affordable units has gone down so much over the years.
Yeah, I'm happy to give you a little background on that. So it has been actually quite stable. The inclusionary housing ordinance, it was adopted in 1999. There was an update in the mid 2000s that included, I think it was 2004, after that housing element was updated. The inclusion of Table 2A, which are the affordable by design standards. You know, in addition to the city's transportation impact fee program and our water and sewer fee program, we incentivize smaller, higher density development across the city as a way to be efficient with our urban footprint. And so affordable by design, it results in more dense and smaller units within a project such as this, but the offset then is fewer affordable deed restricted units. And so the calculation that resulted in the 7 units is a result of applying Table 2A to the project. And incidentally, the inclusionary housing ordinance is in the process of being updated. The City Council received a Nexus study last year and a report around that talked about, you know, that included the recommendation to eliminate Table 2A. We're in the process of doing some outreach and are coming back to the City Council in March to get direction at a study session with respect to the update of the inclusionary housing ordinance. So that issue will get to be addressed by the council via a policy discussion this year.
Thank you. But in terms of this particular project, this is the way that the requirement for affordable housing has gone down over the years is something that's a result of changing city policy. That's just to put it in a nutshell. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the affordable housing requirement is a result of city policy that promotes affordable by design units.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Michael, just to be clear though, that policy hasn't shifted since the Orchid Area specific plan was adopted and at our inclusionary housing ordinance was last updated. And I think Michael was indicating that we're going to come back, that we've got on the forecast, we'll be coming back to the City Council with our study of the inclusionary housing ordinance, because I think that, you know, there's just a reality that we have to acknowledge is that while we were giving a discount for deed restricted affordable or inclusionary units with smaller units, the reality is that the market for smaller units is now unaffordable. And so I think there's going to be a policy question at play for the council to look at that specific policy and ask the question and make a policy decision of whether that discount should be granted given where the market has adjusted.
Thank you. Councilmember Christensen, I'm sorry, Shoresman.
Thank you. Yes, and City Manager Johnson, I think you articulated that beautifully in terms of the discounts, and this project has a lot of affordable by design, and so that's where we get where we are with the numbers of inclusive units. So my 2 questions. The first one is again about our member of the public comment about I think it's 83G. If I don't want to put words in Leah's mouth, but if I understood where she was going with that recommendation that the City Council ultimately deemed the construction of the bike path to be infeasible if the negotiations with Union Pacific don't materialize the way we want it to. I think maybe, I'm just guessing, but maybe there was concern that not intentionally maliciously. I know, Mr. Caudron, you wouldn't do that, but that a decision might be made on the fly if those negotiations, 2 years in didn't seem like they were going the right direction, and there wouldn't be an opportunity for public to comment on whether or not the path was infeasible and didn't go forward at all. So that's what I was sort of understanding in the way that her recommendation was written. So, which is why she would want it to come back to council so that there would be an opportunity for comment. So are you saying, from what you and Councilmember Pease were saying earlier, are you saying that if negotiations were not going the right direction, and say we were 18 months in with the language the way it is, that council would still find out about it and the public would have an opportunity to weigh in? And what would that look like?
Yeah, it's good question. I'll just articulate. There's definitely no nefarious intent to try to kill bike projects and slow on staff's end. I hope that's clear at least. The intent of that language was actually quite to the opposite, in that if we heard earlier from UP that this was just a no-go, that we could pivot quicker than waiting for the 2 years for that requirement to sunset, and that we could come back and say, hey, developer, you pay us your fees. We'll use those fees to go build something different and walk through the design of doing an alternative project and start that process earlier instead of waiting for that 2-year period to move on. If that would be articulated to council and our active transportation committee as part of our regular updates, that the council would most likely be part of a staff correspondence to let them know that, hey, this hasn't worked out. This is our approach moving forward. If the council so desires to have a requirement to report back, it adds some time to prepare staff reports and go through that process, but we're happy to do so if that would be important to the council.
And so if I'm understanding correctly from what you said before, also, there's plenty of the fees that this development would require would be plenty sufficient in order for the city to get those funds paid to us and build the whole project on our own.
As currently envisioned, yes. So their total fee obligations would exceed what the cost of this individual project is. And the details are usually articulated in the reimbursement agreement that would still need to be approved before they would be able to get reimbursed for this work. And generally what we do is we say, okay, say the project costs $1 million, your fees are $2 million. We'll approve fee credits up to $1 million. You don't pay those fees as you build building permits. You pay fees that go beyond that $1 million. If we get towards the end and say, hey, this project's not buildable, then we say, you're no longer building this. You're paying that $1 million in fees that we had originally credited to you, because now we're taking this on as a city project.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then my other question is not related to the bike path, but just more about public park space. I mean, this is R3, it's medium density. I always generally like to see open space where is there, I know there's the tot lot and there's proposal for a pool and community area, but where is the nearest park or sort of large grassy area where people can move to this development?
It's just around the corner from the site. So the intersection of Tiburon and Ranch House Road. So this project fronts along Ranch House as well as Bullock Lane. And so there is a park that is part of the Orchid Area Specific Plan. I believe that they're working on kind of planning like some minor changes to that plan, but I don't know if, Michael, you know the update of when Parks and Rec is starting to look to move forward on building that.
Yeah, that's a priority project, and it's one that will be looked at in the 2023 through 25 financial plan to see where it falls in the context of all the important capital projects that the city is going to pursue. In the meantime, the Trail Junction Park is expected to be delivered sooner, and the trail open to the top of Rigetti Peak, which I know is a nice feature of the neighborhood, And there are other linear parks and pocket parks within the neighborhood that may be developed in advance of the neighborhood park, which will really be a great feature. I know in speaking just yesterday with Director Avakian from Parks and Rec that he is hearing from neighbors of an interest in getting that park in place. I know everybody's interested in seeing that park developed, and it is a priority for the city.
And I will say the project, this particular project compared to some of the others in the Orchid area does provide its own recreational space, which is a little different than you've seen with some of the other projects, the single family in particular. So with the tot lot, the outdoor kind of barbecue shade area, the landscaped areas, and then the pool and clubhouse. So there's some things built into the project itself as well.
Thank
Madam
you.
Mayor and Councilmember Shoresman, just to hop in on the park. So this is one where there was an entire specific plan, and Michael, correct me, I think it's about 10 acres or so, 11 acres for park space as part of Rigetti Ranch. And that's the big grassy area, I think the fields that people are looking for. We haven't quite programmed that. And I don't see Greg online. I don't know, I'm going to bring Shelley into the conversation. But I think we've got some funding set aside to do some of the planning, and then longer term, we've worked in the CIP to deliver that full park. And I know this is frustrating for these master planned area, for example, like the Margarita area where the park site is on the Damon Garcia property. We haven't been able to deliver because that property hasn't come through yet. Orchid area is different. We actually, as part of the Rigetti Ranch subdivision, we got the 10 acres set aside. So as you're coming down kind of, I forget that, is it Tiburon, I think, as you're coming down from Orcutt Road, you'll see all of that open space on the left-hand side. That's all the park space. And we'll be engaged in that planning process. And Shelley could probably chime in with the details on the timing of the delivery of that in the CIP.
Sure, let me just hop right in. There's actually 4 parks in this planning area. Staff are working on quick builds because they just had the blueprint adopted. And so they're working on some plans to activate the linear park. They're working on the trailhead park. There's a little pocket park that actually provides an interesting opportunity with a Cal Poly class. So they'll be working on designs this quarter for it. It's adjacent to some eucalyptus trees and can be good monarch habitat. And then the large park is what's underway for planning. So we're working with our consultants to start the planning process for the Rigetti Ranch Park. And we would expect that the full design capital improvement project will likely be coming forward to council with the 23-25 budget allocations. And Greg and his team plan to start public outreach this spring with this work effort. So it is coming very soon. We know there are many people living there, and it's one of those circumstances where we in the plan didn't plan for the parks to be a condition for people to move in. Instead, it's following, but we are well underway now that they have the master plan, the blueprint adopted, and we'll be following what it articulated for what the needs are in the neighborhood park.
Thank you so much. I really look forward to all those.
Well, thank you for all the questions. I have a comment, not a question, so I'll wait till later. Now is our chance to have public comment. So if you are on the line and would like to have say something about this project, please let us know. This is your chance to raise your virtual hand. And if you would like to speak on this item, we'll be calling 2 names at a time. When your name is
Mayor,
called.
I'm sorry,
Yes?
we need to hear from the applicant.
Oh, so sorry. I apologize.
And I've promoted
Can
Mr.
everybody
Young.
hear me?
You can now, yes.
Okay, good. Let me share my screen with you. I was going to thank you all for giving us an opportunity to present tonight. I'll just do a quick presentation. We have with us tonight for questions that may come up later. Barry Ephraim, the project owner, Brian Sevi with KTGY Architects, Rick Polhamus with Sitescapes, and Matt Walsh with Walsh Engineering. Give me a second here. I've got your faces are blocking my notes. Sorry. Our overarching goals were to design a community which encourages walking, biking, and social interaction, is land efficient and affordable by design, reduces the visibility of cars, garages, incorporates housing typologies with diverse types, sizes, and uses, has distinct but complementary architectural styles, and connects to and expands the city bike path system. Our project is located on 2 parcels. The purchase of the second parcel a year after the first provided the width to make a more walkable and inviting neighborhood. The site is between Bullock Lane to the west and Ranch House Road and Sponza to the east. This allowed us to create a dramatic central Main Street, which terminates at a focal point community recreation center and limits automobile through traffic. We also were able to add portals that went into sub-neighborhoods with surrounded by homes and activated by patios. And we also were able to integrate some access points to our neighbors to the south. Our project promotes bike travel by connecting the bike path that's on Ranch House Road all the way through to the citywide bike path that will be extended all the way to Bullock Lane to the north. And here you can see our ultimate, what we ultimately came up with on a site plan with our goals overlaid on it. And some of this might be a little redundant with the staff report, so I'll go through it quickly, but the bike path that we're putting is about a half mile long, and you can see here it'll be a great connection of everything to the south of the city and carrying it up so everybody can go downtown on their bikes. Also, this is a little redundant as well. There were 3 requested planning commission changes. We were able to take the bike path from 10 feet to 12 feet for its entire length of the bike path with the help of staff. We also increased patio depth, which was a great comment from the planning commission that helped our project. And we added the ability to put a park in this location here. And so we're excited about having that as well. That concludes the presentation that we had, but there was a question regarding the all electric that was brought up earlier, and I thought maybe I could just address that now. We're currently drawing the working drawings for the apartment portion of it, which is about half the project that's on the west side. And we are planning that to be all electric. We're a little bit trying to figure out what we do with our pool. So we're investigating how do you heat a spa, if that's makes sense or doesn't, so we're working with that. We intend on selling the eastern portion of the site to a for sale housing builder. So we would like to stay with the ordinance on that and try to see. We would encourage them to go all electric, but we don't know what their marketing tells them. So that's where we're at on that right now. And if there's any other question, I can answer them now as well.
Thank you, John. That's very, very helpful. I appreciate the renderings as well. Any questions from my colleagues? Council remarks?
Yes, I'm just curious about your definition of a bungalow. Can you explain what exactly is a bungalow?
We're using that term bungalow. We took what has been developed kind of across the street from us. There's a project, Iron and Oak, that has a triplex unit in it. So it would be a townhouse project. And we actually take them apart so they're not attached. And that allows us to give people private backyards. And it kind of creates an interlocking building type. When you look at there's three separate buildings in one configuration. And we call them bungalows because of the kind of how they're close together, but yet, and they also are on the main paseo. They're somewhat similar to a Green Court product, like you might see that Robinson Reed did on their project, if you recall that. So that's, and the term bungalow is, we're just using that because of kind of the way it feels.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just curious, I know the Planning Commission suggested it, but around the tot lot, I noticed you kind of have some flexibility potentially, and tots grow up and they get older. And I noticed that a lot of times developers put in a tot lot to try to give kind of that family feel. And as the kids grow older, there's kind of this stuck space. So I was curious what other flexibility you might picture in that space.
Well, we already have adjacent to it, there's a kind of a community barbecue area that is already with shade area. And we had actually planned on it being probably a little more adult than having the tot lot originally. So it'll still have half of it that kind of accomplishes that. And then the other half would be the tot lot area. So it may end up being a really great space for parents that go and want to socialize with each other while their kids are playing, because it'll give them something to do as well.
Got it. Sounds like a great opportunity to partner up with a nonprofit in the community. Any other questions for the developer? Okay, well, thank you so much, John. We'll go ahead and move forward to public comments. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun on that a little bit earlier. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to raise your hand? And if you'd like to speak on this item, you will be called on, or sorry, there will be two names will be called on at the same time. When your name is called, look for a pop-up and click where indicated so you can be promoted to a panelist to provide your comments. City Clerk, do we have anyone who would like to speak at this time?
No, we do not.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. All right. Any other questions, or would we like to start deliberation? I see shaking heads. All right. Vice Mayor Christensen.
Well, I thought the questions people had were very helpful, and excellent staff report. And it's fun to be filling in Rigetti Ranch with houses. And I think the work that the Planning Commission did and the couple of changes that have been made were excellent. I appreciated Leah Brooks's input, but I don't think, I think her concerns were answered by the questions and answers from staff. So I am going to go ahead and move staff recommendation.
Thank you so much. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Councilmember Pease, thank you so much. City Clerk, would you like to call roll?
Vice Mayor Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Pease,
Yes.
Councilmember Marks,
Yes.
Councilmember Shorsman,
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes, and I am very excited that we're continuing to put more housing in the community, which is one of obviously our top goals. So looking forward to seeing this in the future years. And I really am serious. I think it would be a great opportunity to connect with some local nonprofits that work with children around the parks. So we'll move on to item 6C, a review of an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to uphold the denial of a setback reduction request at 1953 Choro Street. Councilmember Shorsman, did you want to?
Thank you. You know what I was going to say. I'm going to recuse myself from this item as I voted on it already as a planning commissioner.
Thank you very much. And I'll go
Can
ahead.
I don't understand why that's a recusal. I just wanna, why is that a recusal?
Well, it's the planning commission's decision that's being appealed and.
I see. Okay.
yeah.
That makes sense now. I just,
Okay.
I guess it's getting close to bedtime. My brain stops, stop work. I'm like thinking, what? I didn't think of it that way, but you're right. We are
Yeah,
doing
no,
that.
that was a fair question. Thank you. Councilmember
You think
Christensen.
she'd want to be here? Okay, sorry. I don't want to talk about it.
No
Thanks.
problem. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to ex parte discussions. I'd like to ask each council member, starting with Vice Mayor Christensen, for their ex parte disclosures. Vice Mayor Christensen.
No ex parte.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks
No ex parte.
and Councilmember Pease.
No, just a site visit, but that was alone.
Great, thank you. And then for me, will staff go ahead and present the report?
Yes, Mayor Stewart, I'm happy to introduce Assistant Planner Walter Edsel, who will go ahead and run through the presentation, and we have other staff here to support depending on the discussion and any questions that the council might have for the team. So thank you, and Walter, go ahead and take it away.
All right, very good. I presume everybody can hear me. So good evening, Mayor Stewart, council members. The item before you is an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision regarding exceptions from the setback standards for a prefabricated metal garage structure at 1953 Choro Street. The commission upheld a prior decision by the Community Development Director to deny a reduction in side and rear setbacks to accommodate the building. The property owner, Todd Miller, appealed the director's decision to the Planning Commission and in turn has appealed the commission's decision to the City Council for final action. Planning staff will be recommending that the council uphold the decisions of the director and the commission, denying the requested setback exceptions. The parcel is in a, the property in question is a residential parcel in a west of side of Choro Street, north of High Street in an R2 medium density residential zone. It's developed with a single family dwelling built between 1890 and 1910, which was moved to this site from 40 Prado in the 1990s. The property was subsequently designated as a master list historical resource known as the Ware Oliveira House or the Victorino House, noted as a good example of Queen Anne Victorian style and associated with an early local farming family. In July 2019, code enforcement staff observed a large accessory structure under construction in the corner of the rear yard and issued a stop work order, noting that a permit had not been obtained for the work and that the structure had been placed within required side and rear setbacks. 2 months later, Mr. Miller, the property owner, filed a director's action application with the Planning Division requesting a reduction in side and rear setbacks from the standard 5 feet down to 18 inches to accommodate the garage structure. The application was determined to be incomplete pending further required information, including building colors and materials and architectural information relevant to evaluating the consistency of this building with the historical character of the property. I'm getting ahead of myself there. In September 2020, the owner submitted plans and information in response to that incomplete letter. Staff determined that the application remained in an incomplete state, noting that the project as proposed would require review by the Cultural Heritage Committee under an architectural review application for their recommendation as to compatibility with the historic character of the property in terms of the form, massing, colors, and materials of the proposed new construction. Mr. Miller again made contact with planning staff in April of 2021, provided photos of the completed garage structure and encouraged a follow-up site visit to view the site and site structure. A site visit was then conducted, which confirmed the structure's placement within the side and rear setbacks and an apparent lack of consistency in scale and architectural character with the Victorian home on the property. So based on the information available in the application file and observations from the site visit, the application was denied as the required findings for approval of a setback exception could not be made. All of the required findings for approval of a setback exception through a director's action application were provided as attachment F of the staff report for this item, just for reference. So Mr. Miller did appeal the director's decision denying this setback exception request, citing the 4 findings upon which denial of the application was based. One of the required findings for a setback exception provides that for a single-story accessory structure, the structure be consistent with the traditional development pattern of the neighborhood. And this is a medium-density residential neighborhood exhibiting a somewhat mixed pattern of development over the years, with older single-family dwellings aligned along the front setback and with smaller accessory structures outlined in orange here, or larger structures, typically dwellings outlined in blue here, found behind the dwellings at the rear of the properties. It is the case that many of these smaller structures depicted are found within the required setbacks, typically within required side setbacks. But these instances are limited to smaller structures, normally garages and sheds, predating the city's first setback standards and now considered legally non-conforming. The larger structures, typically additional dwellings, are consistent with current setback standards. Most all of them were subject to architecture review themselves, and these standards do call for side and rear setbacks of a minimum 5-foot depth at the ground floor. The metal garage structure related to this exception request, outlined here in yellow, is apparently larger than most of these non-conforming accessory structures that one finds in the immediate area. Given its large size and the lack of setback from the side and rear property line, the accessory building to be accommodated could not be found to be consistent with the traditional development pattern of this neighborhood. Another required finding calls for consideration and addressing potential impacts to surrounding properties. And in this case, the proposed accessory structure is unusually large and its metal material makes it quite noticeable amongst the wood and masonry buildings in the area. Placement of the building almost directly adjacent to the side and rear property lines exaggerates the visual and scale impacts to neighboring properties. And given these factors, a setback reduction could not be found to consider or address such impacts. It also has not been confirmed that the building is likely to meet building and fire safety codes, such as fire separation or sprinkler requirements that may apply, as the application has not yet had benefit of formal review by the building and fire departments to confirm this. Moving on to a third finding that is required. In principle, exceptions and variances are typically meant to provide relief from physical constraints or circumstances that make strict adherence to a standard or requirement impractical or infeasible. And accordingly, this is a required finding for a setback exception. But here, with a relatively flat rectangular lot of conventional dimensions that's developed with only a modest single size family dwelling, such circumstances and constraints do not appear to exist, and thus this finding could not be made. The appellant has noted the presence of a large Canary Island palm tree that is said to interfere with vehicle access to the garage if it were to be sited in conformance to minimum setback standards. But as described in the staff report, engineering staff has evaluated these plans, both with the building in its present position and theoretically in a position that provides the required setbacks, and found that the tree did not present a significant impediment in either case that vehicles would be able to access the garage structure. And in any event, such a constraint would seem to arise from the 40-foot depth of the proposed structure rather than the presence of the tree or other physical constraint of the site itself. And finally, the massing form and materials of this large metal structure could not be found by staff to be consistent with policies for preservation of historical resources, such as this master list property. The city's historic preservation program guidelines require that new accessory structures on listed properties complement the primary structure's historic character. The floor area of this accessory structure is about 70% of the dwelling itself, which is somewhat outsized in scale in relation to the house. The character of its utilitarian metal exterior has no apparent relationship to that of the wood-sided, modestly decorated Victorian house on the site. With this mismatch in form, massing, and materials, an affirmative finding regarding consistency with historic preservation policies could not be made by planning staff. And while in considering the appeal of the director's decision, the Planning Commission did acknowledge the eclectic development pattern of the neighborhood and the presence of other smaller non-conforming structures in the area. They also could not discern physical constraints or circumstances that would make conformance to the setback standards impractical or infeasible in this case. And they did uphold the director's decision by a vote of 5-1 with one commissioner absent. So in summary, staff also finds that no indication in the appeal filed of any misapplication of standards or other error in reaching these decisions. And accordingly, staff is recommending that the council uphold the decisions of the director and the Planning Commission, denying the setback exception request, as there does not appear to be sufficient basis for making the required findings to approve it. Alternatively, the council may wish to uphold the appeal, which would effectively approve a setback exception. It should be noted that accessory structures larger than 450 square feet in area that are located on historical properties are normally subject to review by the Cultural Heritage Committee, typically by way of an architectural review application for their recommendation as consistency with preservation policies and guidelines before permits could be issued for construction. And finally, the council may consider consideration of the item with relevant direction to staff and the applicant. And so with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the thorough presentation. Are there any questions from my colleagues currently of staff? Okay. Let's move forward then to the appellant, Mr. Miller. I'd like to go ahead and open up the public hearing to the public. And we'll be giving 10 minutes to the appellant. As a reminder, the appellant is entitled up to 10 minutes of public testimony and may reserve any portion of that 10 minutes for response. So if you wish to reserve any time, if you could please let the city clerk know before you begin your time, or she will make note if you have any time remaining after your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Council, Madam Mayor, staff, and the public. What we have today is the rebuilding of a former structure that was already there. This is the more accurate view of how the structure appears on the property. It is set back. It has a driveway, concrete driveway, and as you can see, we have the canary palm that if we were to move everything over would be severely constricting the ability to use this garage. Now, we had at least 4 of the adjacent neighbors that had promised to submit letters in support of this project, and the only person that had opposed this in the beginning was a person that is unobstructed by its views. Let me go here. So this is the structure that was in existence before a tree fell on it, thereby damaging it, requiring that we rebuild it with this structure, this garage. So you can see from the 2 pictures that this is what appeared and what was present before we had to put up the garage. So we need to find these elements again. Is it consistent with the intent of the zoning regulations? Does it fit in with the community character? And does it provide all of the different mitigations to the visual, the appearance in the neighborhood? As staff's report so eloquently pointed out, this is a pretty eclectic neighborhood, different buildings, many of which are in setbacks and different parts of the parcel. As you can see here, Mr. Miller's parcel is not uncommon when compared to other parcels. However, there are some elevation differences, and as we outlined, we have those large palm trees that would consist or require rather that this be granted in order to have access to the garage. So this is what was presented to the Planning Commission, this picture. It took effectively a sketch of the underlying property, and then it took a poorly imaged picture set out all the way near the street and was presented as a representation of what was there. Now, Mr. Miller, as he was going through this process, worked with code enforcement, worked with the planning staff, many of the planning staff that were on this previous to Mr. Walter. I'm blanking on your last name, I apologize, Walter. Had indicated that if there was a sufficient shading, if we made the needed requirements, if we went through and made this more visually pleasing, that the structure itself could remain. And Mr. Miller is absolutely willing to put different colors, finishes, et cetera, in order to make this fit color-wise, shading-wise, and scaling-wise in the neighborhood. So as required here, we also agree that this should have gone to the Cultural Heritage Committee. We think that it would have been more appropriately found that it is in the setback. It's rightful to do that, to provide the separation from the front house, and then to allow for full use of the property. Now, what I'd like to present you is, this is what the structure actually looks like from the street. This isn't a Google Earth camera on top of an 8-foot pole. This is somebody walking by. And I do want to draw your attention that behind that white fence, that's not the roof line. That's a carport. You can't see this structure from Choro Street. So we have a large fence and we have a carport that are blocking any indication that this thing even exists. This is the view from High Street, the nearest perpendicular street where you even have line of sight on this structure. And we'll put this in here to point it out that it fits in very nicely with this community. And we have a structure that's indiscernible from the adjacent uses. Now, there is a structure that is in the setback in an adjacent parcel. The two adjacent property owners have no problem with this. What we did is went through and highlighted all of the various buildings that, as staff pointed out, are also in the setbacks. This is a character trait of the community. This isn't an exception to the rule. These are other examples of structures that are allowed to exist, zero setback, temporary structures, that sort of thing, all in the community. This is what we're housing. The attempt is to store all of these things that would otherwise be personal property in full view of the neighborhood. This rebuilding of an existing structure is the beautification that we are striving for in the community. We're trying to house everything, we're trying to compartmentalize it, and this is the minimal way of doing it. So we also want to point out, I put in red here, a typical turning radius of a vehicle. If we were to move the structure over both forward and inward from the side setback, a vehicle's turning radius would not make this a usable garage, usable structure, any means of having this be a beneficial part of the property. I also want to point out, in looking at this, it has the horizontal siding that would match the house. And Mr. Miller, the appellant, was told to stop work prior to being able to paint it and decorate it, put the trim on that would match the Victorian. That is all something that was going to be expected to be done as the process went forward. So as we go through this, the structure is replacing the shed that already existed and didn't have a negative impact on the neighborhood. If it was analyzed in context with the views from the adjacent parcels, it doesn't have a negative impact on the community. The neighbors have all expressed support. Several of them have promised to write in. As far as I know, they have written in. And the variance in this case, after Mr. Miller went through the trouble to move this house, work with the city to have it historically listed, and then being respectful of it by placement of this structure in the backyard to house everything to complement this house, is now being used as a sword against him. This is a historically listed property. So the variance would allow the property owner in this case to be able to achieve the same beneficial use as the adjacent property owners that have similar setback variances, different construction types, masses, etc. And contrary to what was delivered, Mr. Miller, in trying to resolve this, had fire marshal over, had the building department over, had planners over, and each step said, this is a necessary variance, understanding that we're going to have to pull building permits. There's going to have to be screening and other aesthetic accommodations put in place to make it more fully match the house. So with that being the case, I have my associate Scott Hamblin here. I have Mr. Miller here for questions. I forgot to say on the front end, my name is Daniel Knight. I'm the representative for Mr. Todd Miller. But with that, any questions that you might have on the project?
Thank you so much for that presentation. Does any of my colleagues have a question? Councilmember Pease.
Yes, thank you for the information. I'm wondering if you could tell me the dimensions, all 3 dimensions for the prior structure that was there, the carport. You know, length, width, height.
20 by 20 by 10.
20 by 20 by 10. And so it's an enlargement as to depth predominantly. It does go approximately, and I took these measurements, approximately 18 inches taller.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, so you're saying the width was exactly the same before as it is now?
Approximately. The dimensions of the material used may have changed, so, but effectively it was the same width.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, we'll move forward to.
Just want to reiterate one more thing before we move on. What we're considering here is just the variance itself. We know we still have to go through on this project and do things to the aesthetics, submit building permits, submit engineering, and so forth. We're well aware that there may be conditions with this, and we welcome them.
Great, thank you for that. So we'll go ahead and move to public comment. If there's anyone that would like to provide public comment, this is the time to raise your virtual hand. We'll be calling 2 names at a time. So when your name is called, look for a pop-up and click where indicated so you can be promoted to a panelist to provide your comments. City Clerk, do we have requests to speak at this time?
No, we do not.
All righty. Well, staff, do you have any response to any of the applicant's comments? Mr. Wetzel or Mr. Codron?
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. I don't believe so. I think that the information shared is consistent with discussions that have occurred previously. And if the council has any questions or wants any clarifications from staff, we're happy to weigh in. And again, Walter is here, who's been working on the project, as well as we have Stephen Sheets available, who is a code enforcement officer that originally worked on the project.
Great, thank you. I do have a quick question for Mr. Wetzel. From hearing your presentation to the applicant's presentation, I might have missed something. So the other properties in the area that also have ADUs or some other non-conforming property on their site, do those also have 0 setbacks or close to 0, less than the 5 feet?
You're muted still, Walter.
Okay. Not the larger dwellings in the back that I reviewed. Those, again, all had some level of discretionary review and setbacks imposed on them. These, like I say, the smaller ones, the sheds and the garages, some of those are older ones that are legally non-conforming, but I didn't run into any of the larger dwelling structures that had 0 setback.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Thank you. Well, just to clarify, the property owner, did the property owner get a permit to build this structure on his property before he just did it?
No,
Or
so
was
this
it done
was,
without any permitting? So just to
Correct.
clarify that.
yeah, there were no permits and a stop work notice was issued after we received a complaint.
Thank you.
If I may also add to that, I apologize. Mr. Miller was under the impression that he was simply repairing a structure there. And so at the time he needed a building permit. As soon as he was told that, he submitted a plan set for a building permit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Christensen.
Yeah, I appreciate all the work that staff has done and all the work that our appellant has done and his representative. I know that these appeals are always tricky and difficult. They're always a rock and a hard place. That's the way that's the nature of appeals. Decisions by our planning commission or other advisory bodies to the council. They're always very difficult. I think council member Pease remembers her first couple months on the council when I think we did something like 5 or 6 appeals in a row, and it was like, what? We haven't really had too many. So that's a credit to our community as well as our staff and advisory body members, but I understand why this one is here, and I certainly, can appreciate these issues. However, the appellant hasn't provided the legal findings needed to support the appeal. This is historical property. This is a very large accessory building. It doesn't fit into the this piece of property. It needs to have a setback. Some of the things raised by the appellant, like needing storage space, there can be storage space built, but not necessarily this big. This is in my neighborhood. I remember walking by and kind of being a little surprised that actually the CHC would let something like this get built next to historical property. So I don't think if we were to uphold this appeal, I don't really think it would get through our Cultural Heritage Committee. I can't imagine it would, as a matter of fact. But that's beside the point. I really appreciate the neighbors commenting. I know a few of them wanted us to uphold the appeal. A couple wanted us to deny the appeal. I think it's great that the building doesn't burden the neighbors, but whether or not it burdens the neighbors is not something that is the dispositive issue. Unfortunately, we don't make our rules about whether or not people like it. It's the rules are the rules, and sometimes people don't like it and they still have to follow it. And this is one of those situations. So I am going to be, unless I hear something different from my colleagues, I am going to be supporting staff recommendation to once again deny this appeal.
Thank you, Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Councilmember Christensen, for starting us off and laying out I think the case that I see in this one as well. It is really difficult. I totally feel for this resident, and to have the structure and the neighbors. Some of the neighbors don't see it, aren't concerned about it. That it is an eclectic neighborhood, and truthfully, you can't see it from Choro, and because of the slope, as he notes. So I certainly can see why there would be some consideration, and as Councilmember Christensen noted, that's that's not all that this is about, right? If it had been the replacement with a 20-foot by 20-foot open carport, then, you know, maybe there's a case to say that that was existing, or, you know, I think the eclectic style, I think that a case can be made for that, but not at this size and scale. But more critically, this was a project, a large project built without a building permit in the setbacks, and there's a process that we have to go through. And I don't think that that it meets the criteria for the exception. So it's unfortunate, and I wish there were some way to wiggle around this, but I just really don't see the legal findings to do anything different. So I'll also be upholding the prior decisions and denying the appeal.
Thank you so much. You know, I think when I first started, I also got to join on the council. I got to join and experience about 2 or 3 appeals to start of some pretty big developments. And this is always tough because there's some great reasons to, you know, go either way in a sense. But what still strikes me to begin with is if we allow community members to build wherever they feel like building and however they feel like building, then it kind of goes away from the purpose of why we have all of these rules and regulations. And so I feel like by saying that we'll go ahead and just ignore it this time, feels like it sets a precedence, which doesn't feel good to me as far as the future community members who would want to build something different. And I think the historic nature probably still would be a concern going forward, but it sounds like the appellant understands that they would have to make some changes in the materials going forward. So I don't think that's actually the issue we're talking about today. So that's kind of where I come from, is it comes down pretty simply, unfortunately. As far as the turning radius discussion, unfortunately, I've lived in houses where you have this much room in between your car and walking, you know, reversing out in your driveway. It's not the best, but you can. So I am sorry that for the appellant that this has to be upheld, but I think the denial has to be upheld from my end as well. So I can go ahead and move the staff recommendation. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Vice Mayor Christensen. City Clerk, will you please call roll?
Mayor Stewart,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Christensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Marks,
Yes.
Councilmember Pease.
Yes.
That is 4 yes and 1 abstain due to recusal. Thank you very much for going through this process, and thank you to the appellant and the staff for all the detail and work you did.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart, and appreciate also the appellant's engagement in terms of going through the process now the right way, and we can begin to work with him on how to properly permit a structure that he can make good use out of.
Great, thank you very much. Councilmember Shoresman, if you'd like to come back, we just have the liaison reports and agenda items. If you don't want to, that's okay too.
I'm here.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I can't see you on my screen. I apologize. There you are. Okay, so we are at the end of the meeting today. We'll go ahead and go with liaison reports and communications. I do have one agenda question for all of you. I know Vice Mayor Christensen, we discussed this many times that healthcare is not done at the city level, it's done at the county, state, and federal level. Yet at the same time, in the most recent past year, we did support Salud Carvajal on a resolution for healthcare for all. And currently there is a request by some community members to do a resolution in support of California Assembly Bill 1400, the California Guaranteed Healthcare for All Act. I would love to see if my colleagues would like to agendize this for our next meeting. Any takers or any response?
I'd be willing to do that myself.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Pease?
Unfortunately, as supportive as I am of universal healthcare in some form, I am challenged by the specificity of a particular program or approach. And I feel that it's a distraction for us to weigh in on those specifics. I'm convincible. I can be convinced by having just heard today that there are different ways to go about achieving this goal. I'm not sure that's worth us weighing in on a specific legislative item. So I would not be supportive of agendizing it.
Okay, thank you.
Regrettably.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't think it's worth our time to try to parse healthcare. And it's not that I also don't support major changes in healthcare law and funding, but if we cannot go down the road of every single time there's something about healthcare, which there always is, getting into taking up staff and public time, talking about the various nuances, because it depends on the details, as I've said before. So I am definitely not supportive of it. And I don't know if you probably remember, but I didn't vote for the one when we did for Salute. Or if I did it only just to not be a pain. But yeah, I wasn't in favor of that either. So yeah, I just think as a city, there's too many different good ways of doing things, and we should not be getting into the habit of having those kinds of discussions. Not that they're not very important and absolutely crucial, but there's a lot of very important, absolutely crucial things that we do need to deal with and do need to spend our time on, and that's what I'd like to focus on.
All right, and so you're the tiebreaker. Councilmember Shoresman, are you game or no?
I am, like Councilmember Pease, 100% in favor of healthcare for all in some way, shape, or form. I'm a little bit uncomfortable not knowing the details. I haven't had the time to do my homework on this particular bill, and it seems like the time frame is very short, and we would have to agendize it basically next meeting in order for it to matter. So that makes me a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, we have time to agendize this for February 1st, not for the next meeting, like literally next week. So just kind of giving that a little bit of extra time. And of course, we never have to adopt exactly the resolution that's sampled and sent to us. We can always make changes. All right, well, thank you for everyone's input. Do we have any liaison reports? I see Vice Mayor's hand up. But maybe she didn't mean to put her hand up. No, okay. Councilmember Marks?
Yes, just briefly on the Integrated Waste Management Authority. We're meeting tomorrow, and on the agenda, among other things, is the appointment of Pavo Ogren as the interim executive director. Right now, he's been hired as a consultant, and he's done considerable outreach to the cities and also the CSDs, the authorized districts. So, I'm hopeful that the rest of the board will agree to appoint him as the interim executive director. And then also, we're diving pretty deeply into the budget impacts of the withdrawal of the county and also Los Osos CSD because they have to go with the county because of the settlement of the bankruptcy about the sewer project. And then we're also looking at budget analysis. So I just want to say that the Integrated Waste Management Authority, or Slow Recycle, is moving as quickly as possible to help move the budget process and the fee analysis forward so that the cities and the CSDs can, continue to the next stage. So that the IWMA can forward the various fee proposals that are going to be necessary to keep the organization solvent and continuing to serve the urbanized areas of the county to the best of our ability to really make sure that recycling and especially the implementation of SB 1383 regarding recycling organic material and getting edible food to hungry people that otherwise would just go into the landfill. So at any rate, the meeting is tomorrow, but I will keep you fully informed about the results. So thank you.
Darn mouse. Thank you so much, Councilmember Pease.
Great. I just want to give a quick update about RTA. That's the new bus maintenance facility, which will house the buses and the charging and the offices, administrative offices. Is finished. It's being completed, and the staff is moving in, and so it's super exciting. There was going to be a grand opening next week, but unfortunately, they're going to wait and have a more of a public unveiling when when COVID case counts are a little bit lower. So I look forward to seeing more of it in person. But the project itself is done, moving in. Great news.
It's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Councilmember Schwarzman.
Just a quick update on the Slow Climate Coalition. They've been meeting with them monthly, actually a couple times a month. They're planning to hold a kickoff event, a New Year kickoff event. It was going to be January 20th, but due to COVID, I think they've postponed it a little while. Still possibly having a virtual event that day, but I wasn't able to come up with the details quickly enough to announce it tonight for you all in case you wanted to participate. But I will keep you in the loop about any future live events that they do put together.
Awesome. Thank you. I wondered if that was going to stay at the City Library. Well, thank you very much. Just quickly, I was lucky enough to be part of the women's panel yesterday for the American Association of University Women, and got to be, we were joined with Michelle Rogers, who owns her own photography business, and LeBren Harris, who is, of course, Chamber of Commerce chair and involved in hospitality and on our TBID. And we talked a lot about women in business and what the city is doing for our businesses locally. It was a really great experience. We have also coming up a lot of different subcommittees that are coming up from the League of Cities. Now they go by California Cities, and I'll be joining their taxation and revenue subcommittee, as well as tomorrow we have our African American caucus meeting. So that's the updates I have for you right now. It's the beginning of the year, so not too many. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and not too late, at least 9:30 close. So good night, and we'll see you next week for our regular scheduled meeting on January 18th at 6 p.m., of course, virtually. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.